My name's Eli Turner, and for the past 7 years, I've made a living chasing silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the type you find at dawn when the world exhales and the birds start their song, but the thick, empty kind that lingers where life used to be, the kind that holds stories you shouldn't listen to alone. I started exploring abandoned RV parks out of curiosity. At first, it was about nostalgia. I'd grown up in a family that lived on the road, hopping from one campground to another, chasing summer sunsets and late-night fireside laughter. But life changed, people moved on, and those places faded from the maps. I wanted to see what was left. I thought I'd find old memories, cracked roads, maybe some faded signage with cheerful names like Sunny Acres or Cedar Pines. Instead, I found something else, something those places never wanted to let go of. The first time I noticed it was in southern New Mexico, near a stretch of desert where the wind sings through rusted metal and nothing grows except brittle sage. Locals in the nearest town told me about a place called Silver Vista RV Park, just a few miles down Highway 54. They said it had been closed since the 1980s, after the well water turned bad, and the owners packed up without a word. When I arrived, the sign was still standing, barely. The paint had peeled to ghost white, and the wooden posts leaned like old bones. My headlights caught the letters, "Welcome Arvors," across the top, though half of them were missing. The gravel drive was buried in sand, but my tires crunched over what was once a road. It felt like I was crossing into another time, one that had stopped but didn't quite die. Rows of concrete pads stretched into the dark, each framed by rusted hookups and faded picnic tables. Desert grass had claimed most of it, waving in the dry breeze. But the strangest thing was how orderly everything still looked, like the campers had just left, maybe planning to return. The electric poles still stood, a few cords swinging in the wind, and someone, or something, had swept the dirt clean around one of the old fire pits. I parked near what looked like the main office, a low, flat building with peeling turquoise paint. The windows were gone, the door off its hinges, and the sign over the entrance read, "Check-in/store." Inside, it smelled like sun-baked dust and old wood, the kind of smell that belongs to places time forgot. There were still shelves stocked with faded goods, motor oil, canned beans, even a few postcards showing the park in its prime. I found one that showed smiling families, their RVs lined neatly under blue skies, kids waving from bicycles. On the back, someone had written in looping handwriting, "Wish you were here. The nights are quiet. Maybe too quiet." The date was July 1983. That night, I decided to camp there. It wasn't the first time I'd slept in an abandoned park, and it wouldn't be the last. But something about Silver Vista felt different. Too preserved, too deliberate. I set up near one of the old pads, leveled my van, and lit a small fire with driftwood I'd collected earlier. The desert sky opened wide above me, endless stars, silent constellations, and for a while it almost felt peaceful, until I noticed the lights, faint, flickering pinpoints beyond the far end of the park, where the road looped toward the old bathhouse. At first I thought it might be a reflection, maybe distant headlights, but they moved, slow, deliberate, like lanterns swaying in someone's hand. I killed my fire to see better. The lights disappeared. Then I heard something, not loud, but steady. A metallic clink, 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 the sound of a loose chain tapping against metal. I scanned the darkness, my flashlight slicing through tall weeds and old picnic tables. Nothing, only the whisper of wind and the occasional rustle of dry leaves. When I turned back toward my van, I froze. Someone had closed my driver's door. I knew I'd left it open. The dome light had been on when I started my fire. Now it was shut and the light was off. My keys still hung from my belt loop. No footprints in the sand. No breeze strong enough to push that door closed. I tried to brush it off, maybe the slope, maybe vibration from the wind, but my chest stayed tight. I couldn't shake the sense that the park wasn't empty. I locked the doors, crawled into my sleeping bag, and left the windows cracked to listen. The desert was still, too still. And then, faintly, under that heavy quiet, I heard voices, Not words, just tones, soft, rhythmic, distant. They rose and fell like a conversation from the next campsite over, only there were no other campers. The next morning, I walked the grounds. Daylight made everything less threatening, but more surreal. The bathhouse still stood, doors hanging, tiles cracked. Inside, someone had drawn symbols in the dust, circles overlapping, arrows pointing outward. I found a trail of footprints leading to the back, where the shower drains were rusted open. There, scratched into the metal wall, was a single word: stay. That's when I realized every campsite I'd visited, every forgotten park, every decayed resort, shared something. A kind of presence that lingers after people leave. You can call it memory or something deeper, but it clings to those spaces. I've seen it everywhere, in the fog-thick swamps of Louisiana where vines strangle old picnic shelters, and in the mountains of Oregon where rainwater drips through empty clubhouses like the ticking of a clock that never stops. But nowhere did it feel more alive than that night in Silver Vista. That was the first time I felt watched, not by ghosts or people, but by the place itself. Every time I return to a forgotten RV park now, I think about what we leave behind. The laughter, the campfires, the arguments, the half-built dreams. Maybe those emotions sink into the soil. Maybe they wait for someone like me to wander through and stir them awake. And sometimes when I walk through those cracked lots and silent pavilions, I swear I hear engines turning over. Faint, distant, like they're ready to leave but never quite do. The second park I visited that summer was tucked deep in the Ozarks of northern Arkansas, where fog hangs in the trees long after sunrise, and the air carries the scent of damp pine and iron. Locals called it Lake Hollow RV Camp, but if you asked for directions, they'd hesitate, as if saying its name summoned something better left alone. I drove there on a Sunday morning, following a map printed from an old archive site. The road narrowed with every mile, gravel turning to dirt to overgrown trail. By the time I reached what used to be the main gate, the world behind me felt gone. The sign was there, half buried in vines, the words "Welcome to Lake Hollow Family Park" barely visible beneath layers of green. Beyond it stretched a looping driveway lined with empty concrete pads. A few old campers still sat in place like tombstones for a forgotten summer. One was beige, late 70s, the kind with aluminum siding and rounded corners. Its door was missing, and a raccoon darted out as I approached. Inside, time had peeled everything apart. Wallpaper curled at the seams, the fridge door hung open, and the ceiling sagged from water damage. But on the small dining table sat something that shouldn't have survived, a notebook, yellowed but intact, tied shut with a faded ribbon. I untied it and opened the first page. July 14th, 1991. First night here. The kids love it. Water looks good, no mosquitoes, finally a place that feels peaceful. Flipping ahead, the handwriting grew shakier. July 18th, heard footsteps around the camper last night. Thought it was raccoons. Jim says I'm tired. July 20. The lake looks different today, green, thick, like it's breathing. July 22. Jim's gone out to check the pipes. He hasn't come back. The last entry trailed off mid-sentence. I remember standing there in the stale air, my fingers trembling against the paper. Outside, the breeze had gone still, completely still. Even the trees stopped swaying. That silence pressed in again, heavy and deliberate. I stepped out of the camper and scanned the lakeshore. The water sat dull and unmoving, its surface reflecting nothing. It wasn't algae. It was thicker, darker, almost viscous, like the color of old blood under glass. Something shifted beneath it. A slow ripple, wide and circular, spreading toward the edge. I took a step back. My rational mind told me it could be a fish, catfish maybe, or a log sinking under pressure. But when the ripple reached the shore, it didn't break. It stopped, as if it were listening. The air changed. A smell crept in. Not rot, not sewage, something older. The way old wells smell when you open them after years sealed shut. Earth and metal and something faintly electric. That's when I heard it. A wet, dragging sound, like fabric being pulled through mud, from the far side of the lake. I turned, scanning the shoreline, and caught movement between the reeds, pale and slow. I blinked and it was gone. By instinct, I backed toward my van. Every step crunched on gravel like a gunshot. My heart was in my throat. When I reached the driver's door, I caught sight of something new, smeared across the side panel just above the handle. A dark handprint, human-sized, but wrong. Too long, with one finger dragging lower, as if it had melted down the metal. I wiped it with my sleeve, but the stain didn't budge. I left the park in reverse, backing down the gravel road until was sure the lake was behind me. Only then did I notice that the trees along the exit road grew closer together, tight enough to block most of the light. Their roots bulged from the ground, twisting like veins. I didn't look in the mirrors. That night, at a safe distance in a public campground, I parked beside a row of new RVs, their families laughing, grilling, living without a care. I tried to sleep, but the image of that lake wouldn't leave me. The notebook, the stillness, the dragging sound. The next morning, I looked up Lake Hollow RV Camp again. It wasn't on any modern map. No record of its existence after 1991. I even searched county archives. The land was marked as reclaimed by state. No owners. No transfer of property. But one forum thread mentioned something that made my stomach drop. Open quote, "Old-timers say the ground sank there. Whole campground went soft after the rains. They say the lake swallowed what it wanted." Close quote. After that, I stopped visiting these places casually. I started documenting them, photos, recordings, coordinates, because it felt like they were vanishing faster than anyone could remember them. Some parks crumble naturally. Storms have bankruptcy, neglect, but others, they're buried. The signs disappear, the roads rewild, and even digital maps seem to scrub them clean. It's as if the earth has a way of hiding its own mistakes. By the time I reached Red Cedar Point RV Resort in Northern California, I'd started to recognize patterns. The way every abandoned park had one thing untouched: a swing still hanging, a vending machine still humming, a gate left perfectly ajar, like they were frozen mid-moment. At Red Cedar, it was a payphone. It stood by the entrance, half covered in ivy but gleaming where the metal showed through. A relic, like everything else. I walked past it and stopped cold when I realized it was still connected. A faint dial tone hummed in the receiver. I lifted it, pressed it to my ear, and heard the tone fade. Then, silence. And then, breathing. Sluman, right on the other end. I didn't say a word. Neither did they. I held it there, every muscle in my hand rigid. The line crackled, and in a voice dry and low as wind through grass, someone whispered, "You made it back." I dropped the phone and ran. Even after miles, even back on the highway, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't tell anyone. But from that day forward, I started to wonder if some places don't die because they can't. They remember us. They call us back. And maybe, if you've ever camped somewhere that doesn't exist anymore, they're still waiting for you too. There's one place that still haunts me more than the rest, the Northgate RV Resort, buried somewhere in the plains of eastern Kansas. You won't find it on GPS, not even in old satellite images. I only found it because of a man I met at a roadside diner outside of Salina. He was sitting 3 stools down, eating eggs and toast in silence. I noticed the mud on his boots first, thick, gray, and clinging like it had dried around him. He caught me staring and grinned, teeth yellowed but polite. "You doing that YouTube thing, the one about the dead parks?" he asked. I hesitated. "Something like that." He nodded, as if that was all the confirmation he needed. "Then you ought to see Northgate. Don't got much left of it, but it remembers things." I asked how to get there. He wrote the directions on a napkin. No highway markers, no mile counts, just landmarks. A water tower, a split oak, a dirt trail that looked like it led to nowhere. I tucked it into my jacket pocket and left before he finished his coffee. The next afternoon, I followed the directions. The farther I went, the more the landscape seemed to flatten into something unrecognizable. No birds, no fences, no sound except the hum of my own engine. Then, as if it had been waiting for me, a gravel drive appeared, half covered in weeds, bending sharply through open field. The air grew heavy, humid, like the breath of a place that hadn't been exhaled in years. The sign was there just as he said, tilted, its paint bleached to white. Only the faint outline of letters remained, Northgate RV Resort. Below it, a smaller sign dangled by one screw, check-in office, 0.3 miles. The road narrowed into ruts that scraped the bottom of my van. I passed broken lampposts and decayed hookups, each surrounded by tufts of golden grass. The park had once been vast, easily over 100 sites, but now it was just an open wound in the earth. I parked near what looked like the old recreation hall, a low cinder block structure with its roof half caved. When I stepped inside, the air hit me, damp, moldy, and sharp with ammonia. Light filtered through cracks in the ceiling, landing on rows of folding chairs. Someone had arranged them recently. Each chair faced a rusted podium at the front of the room. On the podium lay a single laminated map of the park, its corners warped with moisture. Every campsite was numbered, but the ink had bled, except for one circle in red marker. Site 27. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the same pull that drags every explorer back into danger disguised as wonder. The site wasn't far, maybe 100 yards from the hall. Along the way, I noticed strange things. A half-buried RV tire, an old propane tank, a bird's nest built inside a plastic lawn chair. The ground squelched beneath my boots, even though it hadn't rained in days. When I reached Site 27, the air changed. There was no wind here, none. The trees around it bent inward, their branches locking like fingers. The picnic table was intact, though the wood had gone gray, and sitting right in the middle of it was a Polaroid camera. It looked new. I reached for it, half expecting it to crumble, but it didn't. It was warm to the touch. I flipped the back open. There was film inside, only one shot left. For reasons I still can't explain, I raised the camera and took a picture of the campsite. The photo slid out with a soft whir. It developed slowly, the white fading into shades of brown and green, and then before the image even finished forming, I dropped it. There was someone in it. A man standing beside the table, beside me, only no one had been there. I glanced around, heart hammering, but the clearing was empty. My skin went cold. I picked the photo back up, my thumb smudging the edges, and stared. The man wasn't blurry or distant. He was crystal clear, standing just behind where I'd been, his hand on the same table, eyes locked straight into the lens. He looked almost proud. I tore the photo in half. That was a mistake. The air around me shifted, pressure dropping so fast it made my ears pop. Somewhere behind me, wood creaked. Once, then again, closer. I turned, flashlight trembling, but saw nothing. Still, I felt it, the awareness of something just out of sight, circling. I bolted for the van, slamming the door, heart in my throat. As I reversed down the narrow drive, my headlights swept across the recreation hall. For a split second, I saw someone standing in the doorway. Same man, same eyes. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. When I hit the highway, I didn't stop for 2 hours. My hands wouldn't let go of the wheel. And yet, part of me knew that photo was still in the van somewhere, even though I'd torn it. The pieces must have fallen between the seats because later, when I tried to find them, they were gone. But the next morning, when I got up to drive again, I saw something tucked under my wiper blade. A Polaroid, whole, clean. It showed the same campsite, same table, same camera, but this time I wasn't in the picture. Only the man. And the caption scrawled beneath it in red ink, "See you at the next one." I've been to dozens of abandoned parks since then, from the flooded ruins of Bayou Pines in Louisiana to the ghostly, snow-buried remains of Evergreen Camp in Montana. But no matter where I go, I find traces of him, or of something that remembers me the way I remember it. Sometimes it's a flicker in a photo. Other times it's a handprint on my door. Once it was the faint sound of a camera shutter in the middle of the night. Every time, I tell myself it's just coincidence, that I've been out too long, seen too much, connected the wrong dots. But deep down, I know. The forgotten parks aren't just decaying, they're watching. They're still waiting for the people who left them behind, waiting for us to return. And when we do, they remember our names. There's a rhythm to the forgotten parts of America. an almost musical silence that hums beneath the rust and weeds. The more of these abandoned parks I visited, the more I started to hear it. Faint, steady, familiar. Like a song I couldn't stop humming even when I didn't remember where I'd heard it first. By the time I reached Hollow Pines RV camp in Oregon, I was no longer searching for stories. I was chasing the feeling, that strange mixture of fear and reverence, the weight of something sacred and broken all at once. Locals told me Hollow Pines used to be beautiful, a forest campground with mountain views, clear streams, and a nightly view of the stars so bright people said it cured their insomnia. But in the early 2000s, the park shut down after a landslide took out half the sites. The owners moved away. The forest took over. I arrived near dusk when fog had begun crawling through the trees like slow smoke. My headlights caught glimpses of wooden posts, cracked cement pads, and the faint skeleton of a once busy rec hall. The main office was swallowed by moss, the windows dark. The sign above the door, "Check in here, we're glad you're back," leaned sideways, one word hanging loose, "back." Inside, the air was damp and sweet, the scent of rot mixed with old pine cleaner. Maps of the campground still hung on the walls, their ink faded to yellow. I brushed off one with my sleeve and noticed something strange, a mark on the legend where Site 12 should have been. The text read, "Closed, unstable ground," and beneath it someone had written in pen, "Do not dig, do not disturb." I stepped back outside as the light dimmed. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no birds, not even wind through branches. My boots made soft impressions in the mud as I followed the path toward Site 12. The deeper I went, the softer the ground felt, until each step left a wet sound like breathing through soil. Then I saw it. The edge of a sinkhole, maybe 15 feet across, with the remains of an old RV half swallowed by the earth. Its roof had caved in, and the back end disappeared into the pit. The air around it smelled of wet copper and burnt plastic. I moved closer, crouched near the edge, and shined my flashlight inside. The beam caught a name, scratched into the aluminum siding near a window. M. Caldwell. The name hit me. I knew it. I'd seen it before. Back in New Mexico, at Silver Vista RV Park, there had been a postcard tacked to the wall. "Wish you were here," signed M. Caldwell. My throat went dry. I looked down again, the beam shaking in my hand, and noticed something moving deep inside the collapsed RV. Not movement exactly, more like shifting reflection, as if something was catching the light that shouldn't have been there. Then came the sound. A slow, rhythmic knocking, thump, 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 echoing from beneath the soil. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't falling debris. It was paced, intentional. I backed away, heart pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. My boots slipped in the mud and I caught myself on a tree root. The sound didn't stop. It followed. Thump, thump, thump. It was under me now. I sprinted for the path, mud flying up my legs, breath tearing at my chest. The forest blurred in the fog, tree trunks twisting like bodies, the ground rising and falling. When I reached the office again, I slammed the door behind me and pressed my ear to it. Silence. Only then did I notice the faint light coming from inside the building. Not flashlight light. Something softer, yellow, flickering. It came from the back wall. A curtain hung over a doorway I hadn't noticed before. I lifted it and stepped through. The room beyond looked untouched, fresh. On a table in the center sat a reel-to-reel tape recorder, still running, reels spinning slowly. Next to it lay a stack of labeled tapes, each marked with a name. The top one read, E. Turner, recorded 2023. That's my name. I froze. My hands trembled so violently I could barely reach the stop button. When I did, the tape spun to a halt with a dry squeal. I stood there in the stillness, listening to the faint click of the cooling machine. And then, from the recorder's tiny speaker came my own voice. Open quote, "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it out." Close quote, I couldn't breathe. The sound was unmistakable. My cadence, my tone, my voice caught between fear and disbelief. Open quote, "Don't go near the pit. Don't dig. They don't stay buried." Close quote. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The recorder clicked again, still playing. And my voice continued, whispering now, frantic, breathless. Open quote, "It knows your name. Leave before it remembers." Close quote. The light flickered once, then died. I ran. I didn't stop until the fog thinned and the road appeared again, glowing faintly under my van's headlights. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Someone had copied my videos, spliced my voice, played a prank, but I hadn't posted anything since Kansas. I hadn't said those words to anyone. When I reached the nearest town, I checked my dash cam footage. The drive up, the approach to Hollow Pines, all there. But once I reached the entrance sign, the recording glitched. The timestamp froze. The rest was black. And yet the audio kept going. It was breathing. Wet, slow, and deep. I turned the dash cam off and never looked at it again. That was the night I stopped trying to understand these places. Because maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe some stories don't want to be told. They just want to be remembered, whispered like prayers through broken windshields and overgrown trails. But still, I drive. I drive because I can't let go of the silence, because every forgotten RV park feels like a graveyard for something larger than us, for dreams that used to move on wheels, for laughter that still echoes through trees that shouldn't know how to remember. And maybe one day, when I stop at the next empty site, I'll find the end of the road waiting for me, and I'll hear my name spoken from beneath the ground, soft and certain, like a welcome home. I think I always knew it would end this way, out here, somewhere between the edge of a forest and the mouth of a memory. I tell myself I'm still searching, still documenting, but deep down I understand what's really happening. These places have been leading me in a circle. It started as exploration, then obsession, and now it's confession. I'm parked tonight in Rivers End RV Camp, though the sign out front says otherwise. The letters have fallen away, leaving only "End." It sits along a dried riverbed in northern Utah, a stretch of cracked clay and twisted cottonwoods. The moon is full, pale as bone. My headlights carve across the ruins of old campsites, collapsed awnings, burnt fire rings, a few toppled mailboxes. I didn't plan to be here. The road just ended here. The GPS stopped working about 20 miles back, right after I saw another one of those Polaroids taped to a highway sign. This one showed a long dirt road leading toward a crooked line of trees. Scrawled at the bottom, again, was the same message: "See you at the next one." I thought maybe if I followed it one last time, it would make sense. Maybe I'd find a pattern, some connection, some meaning in the repetition. But as soon as I pulled into River's End, I knew it wasn't another random find. It felt prepared, waiting. The air has a different weight here. Every sound echoes longer than it should. The slam of a door, the click of my flashlight. When I speak aloud, my words seem to fall a few feet short, like the air swallows them. I set up camp out of habit. The routine calms me. Level the van, check the perimeter, light a small fire. The glow barely pushes past the first ring of trees. Beyond that, everything's black. I open my notebook, the same one I've carried since Silver Vista, and flip through my old notes. It's strange to look at my own handwriting from months ago. So steady, so sure. Each page starts the same: location, coordinates, condition, atmosphere. But as I turn the pages, the notes stop sounding like research, start sounding like confession. The later pages just say things like, "He's closer now," and "the lights moved again." I stop on the last entry I wrote 2 nights ago. If I find one more, I'll stop. The fire crackles, pulling my eyes up. Across the clearing, something glimmers. Not a reflection, a steady pulse of light, yellowish white, low to the ground. It's coming from inside one of the old RVs. I grab my flashlight and walk closer. The air grows colder with every step, the kind of cold that feels wet, like breath on your neck. The RV door hangs open, swaying with the faintest breeze. I climb the metal steps, careful not to make noise. Inside, the light is dim, coming from a lantern sitting on the small table. It looks brand new, but there's dust everywhere else. A smell hits me. Mildew and burnt sugar. And then I see the walls. Every inch is covered in Polaroids. Hundreds of them, tacked in neat rows. Some show empty camps, others half-buried RVs, and a few show me, My van, my hands, my campfires, all from angles I couldn't have taken. Right in the center, framed by a crooked strip of tape, is the photo I tore in Kansas. Whole again. I step back, my legs trembling. A sound rises beneath the floorboards, faint at first, like the shuffle of something dragging through dirt. Then it grows. Slow, rhythmic, pulling itself closer. I stumble out of the RV, nearly tripping down the steps. The door slams behind me on its own. The lantern inside goes dark. The fire I left burning outside is gone, just a wet circle of ash steaming in the cold. I run for the van, fumbling for the handle, but stop when I see what's sitting on my hood, another Polaroid. This one's still developing. I can see the edges fading into focus, my van, the clearing, the fire pit, and then a figure standing directly behind where I'm standing now. I turn. Nothing. Only silence. The photo in my hand finishes forming, and this time I notice something I've never seen before, written faintly in the bottom corner in that same looping red ink. You were always home. My chest tightens, my breath shakes. I climb into the van, start the engine, and drive until the trees vanish into the dark horizon. But no matter how far I go, the road keeps circling back. The same cracked pavement, the same dead trees, the same flicker of a forgotten sign. When I finally stop, it's dawn. The sky bleeds gray. I step out, and there it is. The river's end sign, tilting in the wind, pointing right back to where I began. There's no use pretending anymore. The truth is, these parks aren't abandoned. Not really. They're alive in a way that doesn't need people. They grow from memory, from loss, from all the nights we told stories around fires and left something behind when we left. A name, a sound, a shadow. They've been collecting us one by one through time and silence, and maybe I've just joined the collection. If you ever find a Polaroid near a road that doesn't show up on your map, if you ever see a photo of a campsite that looks too familiar, don't follow it. Don't try to find me, because if you do, you'll realize what I finally understand. The creepiest thing about America's forgotten RV parks isn't that they're empty, it's that they remember you. And when you stop long enough to listen, they'll whisper your name too. I've spent most of my adult life staring at forests from above. My name's Eli Warren, I'm 34, and I make my living filming aerial footage for outdoor brands, sweeping drone shots of mountain lakes, dense pine valleys, the kind of things people repost with captions about peace and freedom. But I learned a long time ago that freedom's a tricky thing out here. The woods don't care about your slogans. They move the way they want to, and sometimes they move in ways that don't make sense. I'd been on the road for 6 weeks, hopping from one campground to another across northern Idaho, logging footage for a documentary about wildfire recovery. The idea was to capture the contrast: burned trunks, new saplings, life clawing its way back. It was lonely work, but I preferred it that way. After losing my partner, Kara, in a hiking accident 2 years ago, solitude felt safer than connection. Out here, I could control what I saw, what I heard, what I let in. That night, I stopped at a dispersed campsite near Priest Lake. It wasn't on any of the official maps, just a small clearing you could reach by a rutted service road about 2 miles from the nearest marked site. I liked it because it was quiet. No campfires, no generators, no families playing country music through Bluetooth speakers. Just me, the RV, and the trees. The pines there grew close together, their trunks so tall and straight they seemed to hum with stillness. It was late September, the air sharp with resin and cold earth. I parked, leveled the rig, and set up a small perimeter light. I'd flown the drone for about an hour before dusk, capturing a grid of footage for my GPS overlay. Everything looked ordinary: the clearing, the line of trees, a creek a few hundred feet east. After dinner, I edited the day's footage, organizing it by coordinate tags. My drone has a function that overlays time-stamped GPS data with each frame. It helps me track environmental shifts over time. That night, I ran one of those automatic comparisons while I sipped coffee by the window, half listening to the distant hum of crickets. Then something strange flickered across the feed. The software flagged spatial inconsistency between frames recorded 2 hours apart. I thought it was a glitch. Sometimes the GPS drifts a few feet. But when I aligned the overlays manually, the coordinates didn't just drift. They jumped. It showed the entire tree line had shifted westward by about 20 meters. Not one or two trees, the whole damn forest, like the land itself had slid. At first, I laughed. Maybe I'd mislabeled the files, or maybe the drone's sensors were off. I was tired, so I decided to review it in the morning. But before bed, I stepped outside to breathe and clear my head. The night was unusually silent. No wind, no chirps. Even the creek sounded muffled, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I stood there for a long time, flashlight in hand, scanning the dark. The pines loomed in their rows, perfectly still, almost too still, like a photograph of themselves. Their silhouettes formed a clean semicircle around the clearing, uniform and precise. I didn't remember them looking that symmetrical earlier, but I told myself that shadows can play tricks. I went inside, locked the RV door, and tried to sleep. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke to a low vibrating sound, a deep, steady hum that seemed to rise from the ground beneath me. At first, I thought it was an earthquake, but the RV didn't shake. The sound wasn't coming through the air, it was resonating through the metal frame like a bass note held too long. I sat up, listening. It stopped abruptly. Then, from outside, I heard a soft crack, wood flexing, a branch snapping under tension. Another crack, then another. I pressed my ear against the wall. The noises were moving around the clearing, slow and deliberate, circling. It wasn't an animal, no footsteps, no scurry, just the sound of pressure, like something heavy adjusting itself in the dark. My rational brain tried to label it thermal expansion, wind shift, a nearby tree falling. But deep down, something ancient and small inside me whispered that I should not look out the window. I should stay still. Of course, I looked anyway. Through the window, in the faint wash of the RV light, I saw the edge of the clearing and the pines standing just beyond it, but their alignment looked wrong. The line was tighter now, the trunks pressed closer together than before, like a crowd closing ranks. I killed the lights. My heart thudded in my chest, loud in the silence. For hours, I lay awake, too afraid to move, half convinced I'd wake to find the trees pressed right against the windows. But morning came, soft and golden, and the forest looked normal again. Birds sang, the creek murmured, the pines were where they'd always been, or close enough that I couldn't tell the difference. I laughed at myself out loud, trying to shake off the unease. I told myself it was fatigue and stress. I'd been chasing, barely sleeping. The forest wasn't moving. I was. But then I checked the drone footage again. At sunrise, I ran another automated scan from the same coordinates as the night before. When I compared the new images to yesterday's, my stomach turned cold. The clearing, my clearing, was smaller. The trees had encroached by about 10 feet on all sides. The grid overlay showed a precise circular contraction, as if the forest had tightened around me. I stared at the screen, waiting for the data to correct itself. It didn't. The map looked like a heartbeat, pulsing inward. I stepped outside to measure it manually, walking the perimeter with a GPS logger, and sure enough, the numbers matched. The pines had moved closer. It didn't make sense. Trees can't shift positions overnight. Their roots run deep. They're anchored to the earth. The only way that could happen is if the ground itself moved. A landslide, maybe? But there was no sign of soil displacement, no cracks, no leaning trunks. That's when I noticed something else. Every tree facing my campsite had a faint scar, a horizontal line running around the trunk at chest height, pale against the bark, like a ring. When I followed the line with my fingers, the surface felt smooth, almost polished. It circled the entire clearing, unbroken, as though something had drawn it in perfect continuity around every pine. That afternoon, I tried to pack up and leave, but when I turned the ignition, the RV wouldn't start. The battery had full charge, but the engine refused to catch. I opened the hood, checked the terminals, nothing wrong. Then I saw the dirt under the chassis. There were pine needles piled thick against the tires, far more than there should have been after one night. and beneath them, the ground looked disturbed, like something had been pressing upward from below. I forced myself to breathe slow, to stay logical. I dealt with worse, stuck in storms, broken axles miles from help. I knew panic wouldn't fix it. I told myself I'd hike to the main road if the engine still didn't start by evening. For now, I'd get one more drone flight in. Maybe the footage could explain what was happening, show me if there'd been a rock slide or sinkhole nearby. I launched the drone around 5 p.m., guiding it high above the tree line. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, dark green and dense, sunlight flickering off the canopy. For a while, it looked normal, but as the drone circled back toward my coordinates, something in the image caught my breath. The trees formed a near-perfect ring around the clearing, a mathematical shape. You don't see geometry like that in nature. And then, while I watched the live feed, one of the trees shifted, just slightly, a fraction of a meter to the left. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The drone's stabilizer wobbled as if reacting to a tremor, and the screen went black. Connection lost. I stood frozen, remote still in my hands, staring at my own reflection on the dark screen. Then I heard it again, that low vibration under my feet, faint but rising, as though the earth was exhaling. And that's when I realized the forest wasn't sliding around me. It was closing in. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was standing there, and the next I was grabbing my camera bag, the drone controller, the keys, anything I could fit into my pack. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stepped out of the RV, but the sound that met me outside wasn't what I expected. No wind, no birds, just a deep, rhythmic creaking, wood bending, roots grinding. The pines were swaying, but not with the randomness of a breeze. They were tilting inward, all of them, at the same slow angle. It was a motion that felt deliberate, synchronized, like 1,000 bodies leaning to listen. I took a step back, staring. The ground under my boots felt soft, almost alive. When I pressed my heel down, it sank deeper than it should have, as though the soil was loosening itself. I should have run. Every nerve screamed at me to go. But some part of me, the documentarian, the rationalist, still wanted proof. I lifted my camera, my hands trembling, and hit record. The lens captured it. The trees bending, their shadows reaching toward the RV, branches stretching like arms. As I zoomed in, I realized what I'd mistaken for bark patterns. The faint lines circling each trunk were shifting too, expanding, narrowing, as if breathing. Then came the sound. It started low, like the wind whispering through pine needles, but quickly grew into something layered, almost harmonic. A hum, but not from any one direction. It came from everywhere. The soil, the trunks, the air. I could feel it in my bones, vibrating behind my ribs. The circle of trees tightened again, just enough for a few branches to scrape the RV's roof. The metallic screech cut through the hum like a cry. I backed toward the center of the clearing, every instinct fighting between disbelief and terror. That's when I noticed something strange through the drone feed, which had flickered back to life on my tablet. The camera, still hovering above, showed not one ring of trees, but several. Concentric circles radiating outward into the forest as if the whole landscape was organized around me. The pines weren't just moving, they were rearranging themselves. I zoomed the camera out, my fingers shaking so badly I almost dropped the tablet. In the aerial view, the pattern was unmistakable, a massive, symmetrical spiral leading inward to the clearing where I stood. It was precise, engineered somehow, and I was at the center. That realization hit me like ice water. I started to run. My boots slipped on loose pine needles as I pushed toward the edge of the clearing, but the closer I got, the harder it became to move. The hum deepened into a pulse, steady and heavy, matching my heartbeat. The air thickened, almost viscous. When I reached the first line of trees, something unseen pushed back, a pressure in my chest, a barrier I couldn't cross. I stumbled backward, gasping. It wasn't physical, but it was there, a boundary. The hum rose in pitch, becoming a chorus of tones that seemed to thread through each other, forming something like language. Not words exactly, more like a rhythm that made sense somewhere deeper than logic. Then the ground shifted. I watched in horror as the pine roots began to uncoil from the earth, slow and sinuous, rising like tendrils from below. The soil bulged and cracked as they extended toward the center of the clearing. The smell hit me next. Damp rot and something sharp like iron. I scrambled back toward the RV, tripping over cables and gear. Inside, I slammed the door shut and fumbled for the ignition again. The key turned, the engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Relief flooded me so hard it made me dizzy. But before I could throw it in reverse, something slammed against the rear bumper. The whole vehicle rocked. Another impact, harder this time. I looked through the back window and saw one of the larger pines pressed against the RV's rear panel, its trunk flexing like a bow under tension. It wasn't falling, it was pushing. I hit the gas, but the tires spun uselessly in the soil, flinging dirt and needles. The hum around me peaked, vibrating the windows. My lights flickered. Every shadow outside seemed to shift and breathe. For a few seconds, I thought it was over, that the forest would crush me where I sat. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. Total silence. The trees froze in place. I didn't wait. I threw the RV into drive and floored it. The vehicle lurched forward, tires clawing for traction, finally catching enough to propel me through the narrow path that led to the service road. Branches snapped and scraped across the sides as I forced my way out, wood splintering against metal. When I broke through the tree line and hit the open road, I didn't look back. Not once. I drove for nearly an hour before I dared to stop, pulling into a ranger station near Nordman, shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. The ranger on duty, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Clark, looked me up and down and asked if I was hurt. I told him what I'd seen, or at least a version of it that didn't sound insane. Shifting trees, vibrations, GPS anomalies. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable, then nodded slowly. You were near the Clearwater Divide, right? Off the old service road? When I said yes, his jaw tightened. He poured himself a cup of coffee, then handed me one. You're not the first, he said. Couple campers last summer reported strange movements out there. We sent a team to check it, geologists, drone guys. Their footage came back corrupted. Instruments went dead. He hesitated before continuing. That part of the forest sits on a fault zone nobody's mapped properly. The soil's layered weird, basalt under loam. They think it conducts vibration differently, some kind of resonance effect. It sounded plausible enough until he added, but the thing is, Eli, those trees you were near, they were logged out decades ago. That area shouldn't even have pines that size. I stared at him, my skin crawling. What do you mean? He shrugged. Means whatever's growing out there now, it's not from our planting records. He suggested I get some rest and bring the footage in the next day. I agreed, mostly because I didn't want to be alone. But when I tried to show him the drone files that night at the motel, they wouldn't open. Every video was there, labeled and time-stamped, but each one was blank, just static and a faint, low-frequency hum playing underneath. The next morning, I drove back anyway. I told myself I just wanted to confirm it was gone, that I hadn't imagined everything. But when I reached the turnoff for that service road, it wasn't there. The dirt track that had led to the clearing was sealed over with fresh gravel and brush, as if it had never existed. I pulled over, got out, and walked a few yards into the trees. The forest felt different, emptier somehow, like the air had been hollowed out. But under the quiet, I could swear I heard it again, that same distant vibration buried just below the threshold of hearing. I left that day and never went back. Still, every few months I take the drone out somewhere new, trying to film again. And sometimes when I review the footage, I catch little things in the background. Tree lines that look too symmetrical, shadows that don't align, shapes that weren't there before. I tell myself it's coincidence. I tell myself forests grow that way sometimes. But every night when I fall asleep in the RV, I think about that circle of pines, standing silent in the dark, waiting for something, maybe for me to come back. Because in my last successful GPS log from that night, before everything went black, there was one final data tag at the center of the spiral, a new coordinate, one I hadn't entered. It wasn't marking the trees, it was marking me. I tried deleting that coordinate file a dozen times, but it always reappeared. Different device, fresh SD card, didn't matter. The tag reinserted itself automatically whenever I imported new footage, like some embedded code that couldn't be erased. I even sent the drive to a friend of mine, a data analyst who works for an environmental survey firm in Missoula. He called me a week later, voice unsteady, and told me he was done. He wouldn't explain what he saw, just said, "Li, don't record near trees again." Then he hung up and blocked my number. That was the first time I realized this thing, whatever it was, hadn't ended when I left the clearing. It had attached itself. Over the next month, small things started happening, barely noticeable at first. My compass would spin aimlessly whenever I drove near dense forest. My drone GPS would drop signal only when I pointed the camera toward pine clusters. And every now and then, my RV engine would sputter for no reason, just long enough to make me pull over and listen. The woods were always quiet when that happened, too quiet, the same way they'd gone silent before the movement began that night. But the worst part was the smell. Sometimes, even when I parked in town, in a paved lot, miles from any trees, I'd wake up to the scent of pine needles and damp soil leaking through the vents, that sharp, resinous tang mixed with something faintly metallic, like rusted sap. I'd check the filters, the ducts, the flooring, nothing. But the smell would fade the moment I stepped outside, only to return the next time I closed my eyes. It followed me like memory. I tried talking to people, local rangers, geologists, even a few native elders I'd met filming a previous project. Most just smiled politely, told me I'd been out there too long. But one old man, a Coeur d'Alene elder named Joseph Greyhawk, listened in silence as I described what happened. When I finished, he didn't laugh. He only asked, "Did they let you leave, or did you run before they were done?" The question stuck in my head for days. He explained slowly that the land around Priest Lake wasn't like other places. It shifted. Not geologically, but spiritually. His people had old stories of forests that moved to protect something beneath them, places where trees rerouted themselves overnight, marking boundaries no human should cross. "They're not trying to hurt you," he said. "They're trying to remember you." I asked him what that meant, but he only smiled sadly and told me to stay away from places where the ground hums. After that, I stopped filming for a while. I took commercial gigs in cities, construction surveys, real estate shots, anything to stay away from the wilderness. But it's strange. Once you've seen the forest breathe, cities start to feel hollow, like concrete versions of the same silence, just waiting for their own roots to wake up. About 3 months after the incident, I decided to face it one last time. I told myself I was going to delete everything, the coordinates, the logs, every backup, and move on. So I parked in a rest area just off Route 57, opened my laptop, and pulled up the raw flight data from that night. But there was something new. At the bottom of the list, beneath all my labeled files, was a folder I hadn't created, just a string of numbers, 2002-3905-0237. The timestamp matched the night I ran from the clearing. Inside was a single video file about 30 seconds long. I shouldn't have clicked it, but I did. The footage was from the drone's perspective, hovering above the clearing. The camera panned slowly downward through layers of mist. At first, I thought it was the same feed I had already lost. The ring of trees tightening, but this time the clearing wasn't empty. In the center stood the RV, my RV, dark and still. And next to it, facing directly upward toward the drone, was a figure. Me. I was standing motionless in the center of the circle, head tilted back, eyes open. My hands hung at my sides. The trees around me seemed to lean closer in the frame, their shadows converging. Then, as the drone's altitude dropped, the figure smiled, or maybe grimaced, and the video cut to black. I replayed it over and over, looking for edits, compression artifacts, anything that could explain it. but it was clean. Metadata confirmed it had been recorded from my drone at 2:37 a.m., exactly when I remembered hiding inside the RV. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing the hum beneath the floorboards again, faint, steady, like a pulse through the frame. I got up, turned on every light, checked the windows. Nothing. But when I looked at my GPS tracker, the same coordinates that had haunted me all along, 48.6281 degrees Nenins, 160.9232 degrees Iwadius, had reappeared on the screen, glowing softly, fixed in place. It wasn't marking the forest anymore. It was marking my location. I panicked, shut the device off, and disconnected the battery. But the next morning, when I turned on my phone, the same coordinates appeared in my Maps app under Recent Places. Then they showed up on my laptop, then in my drone firmware. Every device I owned seemed to carry the same invisible tag, syncing automatically, like the forest was tracking me through its own network. That's when I realized whatever I'd seen that night wasn't confined to that clearing. It had found a way to map itself through me. I left Idaho a few days later, driving south toward Nevada, trying to put as much distance between myself and those trees as possible. But even now, months later, I still feel it sometimes, that vibration underfoot when I camp too close to timber, the faint rhythmic pulse in the dirt. And when I look up from my campfire and catch the silhouettes of pine trunks swaying gently in the wind, I can never quite convince myself they're swaying with the wind. Sometimes they move just a fraction of a beat slower, as if keeping their own rhythm, waiting for me to notice. I've stopped flying drones. I've stopped recording coordinates. I barely even take pictures anymore. But every night before I fall asleep in the RV, I check the GPS just to make sure that number hasn't changed. Because if it ever does, if the coordinates shift again, even by a fraction of a degree, I'll know the forest isn't done. It's still moving. And sooner or later, it's going to close the circle. I told myself I'd stop checking, that I'd live a normal life again, eat breakfast without glancing at the GPS readout, sleep without keeping one eye on the window, stop listening for that low hum that sometimes trembled through the walls of the RV at night. But obsession has a way of wearing new masks. By the 4th month, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was curious. I began mapping my own movements, logging where and when the humming started, cross-referencing the sound with topographic data and magnetic interference charts. At first, it was sporadic, faint signals near logging roads or old fire lines. But then I started noticing a pattern. Every time I camped within 50 miles of the original coordinate, the readings spiked. And the spikes didn't fade. They multiplied. Each new campsite created a secondary signal, a copy of the original, as if the phenomenon was replicating itself through proximity. The more I moved, the more circles appeared on my digital map, small rings radiating outward like ripples in water. It wasn't following me. It was growing through me. The realization didn't hit all at once. It came late one night while parked outside an abandoned ranger station north of Sandpoint. My GPS had begun showing interference before I even turned it on. The entire dashboard pulsed with faint static, the needle on the compass twitching in tight arcs. Then, outside, I heard it, that same subtle groaning of wood shifting under pressure. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The forest was still, silvered under moonlight, but somewhere deep in the pines, a tremor ran through the ground, soft and rhythmic. I walked toward it. Every instinct told me to stop, but something deeper, that same curiosity that had driven me since I was a kid with a camera, kept me moving. The farther I went, the softer the air felt, like it was thickening around me. After maybe 50 yards, I reached a clearing, smaller than the one from before, maybe 20 feet across, and at the center stood a single young pine, thin and straight, no more than 10 feet tall. I would have ignored it, except for what I saw carved into its bark. My name. The letters were faint, drawn as if by shallow roots curling under the surface, but unmistakable. Eli Warren. I stumbled backward, tripping on a root. My flashlight shook in my hand, scattering shadows across the trees. For an instant, I thought I saw faces in the bark, eyes closed, expressions calm like sleepers in some slow dream, and beneath it all the hum continued, steady, alive, like breath. I ran. I don't remember how long I ran for. By the time I got back to the RV, my lungs burned, my legs ached, and the ground under me felt like it was swaying. I slammed the door, locked it, and sat there in the driver's seat until morning, gripping the wheel like it could anchor me to something real. When daylight came, I drove south without stopping, past Spokane, past the empty highways until the forests turned to open desert. I parked in a sun-bleached rest area surrounded by nothing but sand and scrub. No trees, no roots, no movement. For a few days it worked. The humming stopped. My GPS readings flattened out. I started to believe I'd outrun it. Then, on the third night, I heard something rustling outside the RV. Not the scrape of wood, more like something brushing against metal, slow and deliberate. I turned on the porch light, and my stomach dropped. Stuck against the lower frame of the RV door was a cluster of pine needles. Fresh ones, green, sticky with sap. The nearest pine forest was over 200 miles away. That's when I understood it wasn't bound to geography anymore. The circle wasn't in the ground. It was in me. I started noticing more signs, faint impressions of root systems appearing in the condensation on the RV windows each morning, branching and curling like veins. A thin film of dust on the floorboards forming spiral patterns by dawn. Sometimes I'd wake to find the air thick with the scent of pine resin, even in the middle of the desert. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was suffering from stress-induced hallucinations, some combination of fatigue and guilt. But the physical evidence was undeniable. I once found a small pine cone wedged into the seam of my backpack zipper, identical to the species native to Priest Lake. It felt like a warning, or maybe an invitation. That night I dreamed of the forest again, but this time it wasn't closing in. It was opening. The trees peeled away like curtains, revealing something vast beneath them. Not roots, but veins of glowing light running through the earth, pulsing in slow rhythm. And at the center of it all was a hollow, a living void, breathing in time with me. When I woke, my GPS screen was on, though I hadn't touched it. The coordinate had changed, 48.6281 Greece, 160.9232 Drudy W. The original site was gone. In its place was a new set, about 12 miles south, and next to it a label I'd never seen before, replacement point. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't gone to check it yet. Every instinct tells me to stay away, but another part of me, the part that can't leave a question unanswered, keeps whispering that maybe if I go back, it'll stop. Maybe if I face it, the circle will finally close and I'll be free of it. Or maybe that's exactly what it wants. I'm sitting here now, parked in a truck stop outside Coeur d'Alene, the new coordinates blinking faintly on my laptop. There's a low hum in the walls again, steady as breath. I can smell pine resin even through the diesel and asphalt. Maybe I'll drive out there tomorrow. Maybe I won't. But I know one thing for sure. The forest hasn't forgotten me. And when the night gets quiet enough, I can hear the pines shifting in the distance, aligning themselves one by one, getting ready for my return. Because circles don't end. They wait. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside, the whisper of trucks on the highway, the soft buzz of lights over the pumps, folded into the same low rhythm, that deep pulse I'd heard under the earth. It was faint, patient, and steady. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. Not because I was brave, because I was tired. You can't live your life looking over your shoulder at something that doesn't have a body. You can't keep running from a forest that learned how to follow. So I drove. The roads out toward Priest Lake were almost empty, the early fog stretching low and gray across the asphalt. I didn't need to check the GPS. The signal in my chest, that quiet magnetic pull, was enough. Every mile I drove, the hum grew a little stronger, almost comforting now. When I reached the turnoff where the old service road should have been, I expected to find what I'd seen before. Gravel, brush, nothing more. But there it was again, a narrow dirt track cutting through the undergrowth like it had been waiting for me. I stopped the RV and got out. The air was still, cold, and though the sky was pale with morning, The forest ahead looked darker than it should, dense, patient, full of its own gravity. I walked. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Even our footsteps felt muted, like the ground was swallowing the sound before it could rise. The smell of pine was sharp enough to sting. When the clearing came into view, I almost didn't recognize it. It was smaller now, tighter. The trees packed closer together, their trunks curving ever so slightly inward. The old perimeter lights I'd left months ago were gone. My tire tracks had vanished. But in the center of the clearing, resting perfectly still, was something that froze me in place. A drone. My drone. It lay there, half covered in soil and pine needles, its propellers twisted but intact. My breath caught as I picked it up. The same model, the same serial number etched under the frame. I hadn't seen it since the night the feed went dark. The moment I touched it, the hum returned in full force. The ground shuddered beneath my boots, slow and rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat. The pines began to move. Not bending, not shaking, shifting. Their trunks straightened, then leaned with a strange fluidity, roots flexing as if the earth itself were liquid. The clearing tightened, closing around me in a deliberate motion. I should have run, but I didn't. Instead, I powered on the drone. Somehow, the battery still had charge. The camera light blinked once, then again, and the feed came alive on the small controller screen. I tilted the lens upward. From above, the view was the same pattern I'd seen months ago, a perfect circle of pines, radiating outward in mathematical precision. But this time, there was something new in the center. A dark shape spreading across the soil, growing wider with every pulse of the hum. A shadow. My shadow. Except it didn't move when I did. I took a step back, but on the screen, the shadow stayed rooted in place, its edges quivering like oil. The hum deepened until it was no longer sound but vibration, rolling through my bones, syncing with my heartbeat. And then from within that dark shape, something rose, slow, graceful, inevitable. A shape made of roots and light, thin as smoke but alive. It reached outward, curling toward me the way roots might reach for water. Every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't. The vibration had become a rhythm, one I recognized. It wasn't random. It was mine. Each pulse matched the beat of my heart. Each flicker of movement in the trees echoed my breath. It wasn't the forest moving around me anymore. I was part of it. One motion, one system, one pulse. The realization hit all at once. It hadn't followed me out of obsession or malice. It had been calling me back to finish what I'd interrupted, to complete the circle. The shadow reached my feet. I felt it, cold and alive, winding up my legs, seeping into my skin. My vision blurred, not from fear, but from understanding. This was never about invasion. It was about connection. The camera feed flared white. For an instant, the forest above glowed, every tree, every branch lit with threads of light, all of them converging toward the clearing, toward me. And then everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, it was dusk. The drone lay broken beside me. The clearing was empty. The air smelled clean. No resin, no rot, just damp earth after rain. My hands were coated in dirt. My clothes were torn, but the forest was still again. I stumbled back to the RV, shaking, exhausted. When I turned the key, the engine started on the first try. I drove without thinking, without looking back, until the woods thinned and the stars came out. It's been 3 days since then. I haven't told anyone where I went or what I saw. I deleted all the remaining files, wiped every device, but one thing remains, burned faintly into the inside of my left wrist. A ring. A thin, pale line, the same color as the scars I once saw on those pines. It doesn't hurt, but sometimes, late at night, it pulses. Slow and steady, in rhythm with the earth beneath me. I don't know what the forest wanted. Maybe it just wanted to remember. Maybe it wanted to connect. All I know is that when the wind rises now and the trees begin to sway, they don't frighten me anymore, because I can feel them moving, not against me, not around me, but with me. And in that quiet, in that deep, resonant pulse that hums under everything, I finally understand what the forest was trying to say all along. It wasn't warning me, it was welcoming me home. I've spent most of my life chasing the sound of rain through trees. It's not just background noise to me, it's a pulse, a memory, a kind of language that the forests of the Pacific Northwest whisper when no one's around to listen. My name's Evan, and for the last 8 years I've lived out of my Volkswagen camper, chasing the peace I once found on the road and maybe running from the silence that followed me home. There's something about this region that feels both eternal and forgotten. Oregon's mist, Washington's evergreens, the way fog can make a highway look like it's vanishing into another time. You think you're just camping, you think you're alone, but you're never truly alone out here. Not in these woods. The first time I heard about the lost campers, I was parked just outside Quinault, Washington. It was one of those nights where the fog was so thick it looked alive, rolling and breathing against my windshield like it wanted in. I'd been recording stories for my small YouTube channel, mostly interviews with locals who'd lived long enough to see strange things in these forests. A retired ranger named Dale told me over coffee that night, "You don't find bodies here. You find camps, like the people just stepped out for a minute." I laughed it off back then, but that sentence, it followed me, because weeks later, I parked near Hoh Rainforest, not far from where some of those disappearances happened. I told myself it was research. The truth is, I think I wanted to feel whatever they felt before they vanished. The same pull that made them step just a little too far into the green. The first night was nothing but silence and rain. You could hear water hitting moss, soft and endless, the kind of sound that makes you forget where the world ends and the forest begins. But around midnight, I woke up to something new. Footsteps. Not animal ones. Slow, careful steps circling my van. You learn to tell the difference when you live out here long enough. Deer move light and nervous. Bears crush twigs and breathe heavy. But this was measured, intentional, like someone pacing and pausing to listen. I turned off my lantern and waited. The footsteps stopped too. For a long minute there was nothing, just the sound of my own pulse in my ears. Then 3 soft knocks on the side of the van. It wasn't hard, not a bang, just polite, like a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. I froze. The knocks came again, 3, slow, deliberate. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. The rain started again, and when it did, or whatever it was, left. I never saw a flashlight, never heard footsteps fade away, just gone. The next morning, I checked the dirt around my van. No footprints, only mine. That should have been enough to make me leave. But fear does something strange out here. It competes with curiosity. I told myself it was an animal brushing against the paneling. A branch, maybe. I stayed another night. That evening, I walked into the forest with my flashlight, following one of the old trails that paralleled the Hoh River. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. You start to notice it when the forest stops answering you. The birds, the frogs, even the wind. It's like being inside a lung that's holding its breath. About a mile in, I found it. A campsite. 2 folding chairs, a small tent half collapsed. A lantern, long dead. It looked recent, like someone had been there a day ago. Except there were no footprints. Not around the chairs, not by the fire pit, not even where the zipper of the tent had been tugged open. The ground was untouched. Inside the tent were 2 sleeping bags, neatly laid out. I remember the pattern on one. It had cartoon bears on it, the kind you'd buy for a kid. And beside it was a toy, a little yellow truck half buried in pine needles. I stood there, rain dripping through the canopy, thinking about Dale's words. You don't find bodies here. You find camps. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain turned heavy, hammering the roof of my van. Every few minutes, I thought I heard voices outside, soft and overlapping, like people talking just out of range. I'd turn on my flashlight, nothing, just fog and dripping moss. Around 3 a.m., I heard laughter, faint, echoing, a child's laugh. It was coming from the direction of the river. I don't know what made me open the door. Maybe it was the sound. It didn't feel malicious, just familiar. But the second the cold air hit me, that laughter stopped. The forest went dead silent again. Then I heard breathing, right next to the van door. It wasn't mine. It was wet, uneven, almost like someone struggling through a cold. When I swung the flashlight toward the sound, I caught something pale move between the trees, thin, human-shaped, gone before the beam could settle. That was the moment I finally locked the doors. In the morning, the toy truck was sitting on my windshield. That was Ho. But it wasn't the last time I found a camp like that. 2 months later, in Olympic National Park, I met a couple of backpackers who told me about a place near Solduck where tents appear and disappear overnight. They'd seen lights out there, too. Orange flickers deep between the trunks, never moving like flashlights. I drove there the next day. That road, it felt wrong. Not haunted, not cursed, just wrong. Like the turns didn't quite line up with what my eyes expected. When I parked, I noticed something odd in the mud. A set of tire tracks that matched mine exactly, side by side. They weren't old, they were fresh, and yet I'd been the only vehicle on that road. That night, I left my recorder running outside the van, just ambient audio for the channel. When I played it back the next morning, it was mostly wind and water, until around 2:17 a.m. There, faintly, was my voice. It said my name, twice. Then, "Why'd you leave us?" The problem is, I'd been asleep at that time. I still have the recording. I've played it for others, Mike, and they hear it too. And here's the thing I've come to believe. Not all who go missing in the Pacific Northwest get lost by accident. Some follow a call that doesn't belong to this world. A sound that feels personal, intimate, like it's meant only for them. And if you've ever heard the forest whisper your name, you know exactly what I mean. The question isn't whether they're gone, it's whether they ever wanted to come back. That's when I decided to start tracing their paths. To see what the forest was trying to say to them or to me, because after that night I started hearing it too. The same words, right outside my van, just before dawn. Evan. The voice isn't loud, it's patient, and every time I hear it, it's closer. The sound started following me somewhere near Forks. Not the town itself, but the long stretches of road that curl through the damp lowlands west of it, where fog crawls like a living thing over blacktop and moss-drowned signs. I'd leave one campground behind, thinking the whisper would fade with the distance. But it didn't. It just changed. Adapted. Some nights, it was my own voice calling back to me. Other nights, it was my brother's. He died 6 years ago. A car accident on a logging road north of Aberdeen. He wasn't much of a camper, but he always said he'd come with me one day, once he got time off work, once life settled down. Those were his words. Once things settled down. Funny how they never do. The first time I heard him, it was raining hard enough to make the van rock. I'd been parked near Lake Crescent, eating cold beans from the can, half listening to a podcast through the static. Then beneath the rain, a soft knock. 3 times, like before. I froze. Then came the voice. Evan. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't distorted. It was him. Same tone, same hesitation before the V. I threw open the door so fast I dropped the can. The forest outside glowed silver in the stormlight, rain hanging like beads on every fern. But there was no one, just fog, water, and a faint reflection of my own face in the puddle beside the tires. I closed the door and sat back down. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, something had changed. The air smelled like rust, not rain. When I looked at the mirror above the kitchenette, there were handprints, wet, human-sized, on the glass. 5 fingers, smudged. I cleaned them. They came back the next night. It was around then I started talking to locals again, trying to find some logic. One old fisherman at a diner in Port Angeles told me something that stuck. He said, "The woods here don't take people, they remember them." I asked what that meant, and he just smiled with too many teeth missing. "You'll see. Just don't stay in the same spot 3 nights in a row. They start to know your name after that." I laughed, but it was hollow, because deep down, I already knew what he meant. On the 3rd night anywhere, the dreams came. They started as memories, simple, harmless, the sound of my brother laughing, the smell of burnt marshmallows. Then the scenes would shift. I'd be walking a trail I didn't recognize, but the air felt thick, muffled, like the forest wasn't outside me anymore. It was inside, breathing with me. And always in the distance, I'd hear him. "Evan, come see." One of those dreams led me to a real place. It was near the Bogachil River, a side trail marked by an old wooden sign, half rotted into the mud, the letters barely visible. Camp 47. The name hit me. I'd heard it before. Someone online had mentioned it. A ranger post in the 70s shut down after 2 disappearances, a father and son, never found. I told myself I was just going to film it, document the story. That's how you rationalize it when curiosity wants to kill you. You turn it into content. The drive there was short. The air felt heavier the closer I got, the way it does before a thunderstorm. Except there was no lightning, no wind, just pressure. When I found the clearing, it looked almost staged. A single stone fire ring in the center, the remains of a park bench, and around it, rusted hooks nailed to trees, empty rope loops hanging like forgotten nooses. But what really stopped me was the camper. It was half buried in the brush, tilted, paint peeled down to silver. A Volkswagen, like mine, same model, same year. For a long minute, I just stared at it. It felt like looking into my own reflection after death. I walked closer. The door was open, hanging by one hinge. Inside was chaos, molded blankets, an old camera, dishes stacked in a corner, and on the counter, a notebook. It was damp, but still legible. I flipped through the first few pages. Grocery lists, travel notes, simple things. Then, halfway through, the writing changed. It became frantic. Page after page of the same sentence, "It won't let me leave." I kept reading, hoping for a clue, something that could explain. The last entry was dated August 14th, 1983. It said, "I heard my own voice outside again tonight. It sounded sorry this time." That's when I heard movement outside. At first, it was just the soft patter of rain returning. But then, a second rhythm. Slow, dragging steps through mud. They circled the van just like before. I turned off my flashlight. The night pressed in. Something scraped the metal panel. Then that same voice, my brother's again, said, "You found it." The air went cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from weather, but the kind that feels intentional. Like something had decided to take the warmth away. I grabbed my camera and ran. I didn't even bother starting my van until I was a mile down the road. When I looked at the footage later, there was nothing but static where the voice should have been. But there was one frame, just one, where something pale and human-shaped stood behind the other van's window, watching. I didn't return to Bogachil. I didn't need to. Because 2 days later, when I stopped for gas outside Sequim, I found something wedged under my windshield wiper. A page, torn from that same notebook. The words smeared but still readable, "You were supposed to stay." That's when I knew it wasn't about the missing anymore. It was about the ones who came back. And I think somewhere in those forests, they still are. You drive through fog thick enough, stay quiet long enough, and sometimes the forest forgets to let go of your reflection. That's the trick of the Pacific Northwest. It doesn't haunt you with ghosts, it haunts you with yourself. It makes you wonder whether you ever truly left the woods at all. Because lately, every time I close my eyes, I can still hear the rain, but it's coming from inside the van. And the knocks, they've started again. This time they're coming from the cabinet behind me. I didn't open the cabinet that night. I couldn't. There's a point where fear turns inward, where you stop being afraid of what's out there and start being afraid of what you might find in here. The knocks stopped after 3, always 3. Then silence. Not the gentle quiet of the woods, but that blank, pressing void that eats up even the sound of your breath. I sat there until dawn, staring at the thin strip of light under the cabinet door, waiting for it to move. When the sun finally rose, I did open it. Inside was nothing but a damp smell and a folded piece of fabric. I pulled it out, thinking it was one of my shirts that had gotten wedged behind something, but it wasn't mine. It was a child's raincoat, tiny yellow, with the tag still faintly legible, Camp 47 Outfitters. I dropped it like it was on fire. That's when the smell hit. Sweet, rotting, the kind that comes from mushrooms growing through something that used to be alive. I opened every window, but it clung to me. It followed me for days. Everywhere I went, that smell came with me. It got into my hair, my clothes, my coffee. I'd step out to breathe the mountain air, but the rot was already there, hidden in the fog. By the time I reached Mount Rainier, I hadn't slept in nearly 2 nights. My eyes twitched at shadows, my thoughts looped back on themselves. Still, I kept driving, kept filming, kept pretending I had control. It's strange what the road does when you're unraveling. It stretches and folds at the same time. You start seeing the same gas station twice, the same hitchhiker in 2 different places, the same turn you swore you didn't take. I parked near Ohanapekosh that night, a small campground tucked deep among the cedars. There were only 2 other campers in the lot, both silent and unlit. The kind of stillness that feels rehearsed. I remember standing outside my van, listening to the forest breathe. The mist slid through the trees in slow ribbons, soft and deliberate. Then from somewhere behind the fog, voices. Not 1, not 2, a whole crowd. It sounded like a gathering, soft, layered speech. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Reverent, rhythmic, like prayer. I turned off my lantern. The glow from the fog pulsed faintly as if lit from within. My heart started to hammer, but not from fear. At least not the usual kind. It felt like recognition. Like I'd heard this before, long ago, in a dream I didn't remember having. The voices stopped all at once. Then a single word floated out from the dark. Stay. It was spoken so gently that part of me almost wanted to listen. That was when the other campers' lights flickered on, both at once. Not from inside their vans, but from within the forest. 2 faint amber glows, spaced evenly apart like eyes. I slammed my door shut and hit the ignition. The van sputtered, choked, and died. Outside, the fog thickened until I couldn't see my own headlights. The temperature dropped so fast that my breath turned white. Then, from directly behind the van, came the dragging sound again. Wet feet through mud. Something brushed the back window slowly. A handprint bloomed in the condensation. Then another. And another. Too many fingers. I whispered my brother's name before I could stop myself. Everything went quiet. Then, from outside, his voice. Don't leave me again. The rearview mirror cracked. Just split right down the middle without impact. I remember screaming, though I don't remember the sound. I only remember light, an impossible greenish-white glare cutting through the fog, so bright it washed out everything. When I woke up, it was morning. The van was idling, door half open, radio on static. No footprints. No other vehicles, just me and the yellow raincoat folded neatly in the passenger seat. The strange thing was, it was dry. That's when I started to believe this wasn't haunting. This was invitation. These weren't random vanishings. Every lost camper wasn't taken. They were chosen. Called by something in these forests that speaks the language of familiarity. It doesn't frighten you away. It makes you feel known. And that's the worst kind of fear. The kind that feels like home. Over the next week, I followed what little evidence I could. I revisited missing person reports, coordinates, old ranger logs. They all had one detail in common. None of the missing brought a map. They didn't plan to get lost, but they did plan to stay just one more night. That phrase appeared in at least 5 cases. The same phrase I'd said to myself the night before the first knocks began. It was enough to keep me awake again. Not from nightmares, but from the possibility that the pattern was looping around me now, that maybe I wasn't documenting this story anymore. Maybe I was inside it. By the time I reached the base of Mount St. Helens, I'd stopped filming altogether. The footage didn't matter. Nothing ever recorded the sound anyway. I parked beside a creek and sat watching the water drag branches downstream. That's when I saw it. A reflection, not mine. It was the same van, same model, same scratches on the panel, but parked behind me in the water's surface. When I turned around, the road was empty. The reflection didn't change. It just sat there, rippling slightly. And inside it, a figure leaned forward from the driver's seat, staring back at me. Not a stranger, not a ghost. Me, but older, tired, mouth open like it was trying to speak. Then the reflection smiled, and I swear I felt the air inside my own van shift as if someone behind me had just exhaled. I turned. Nothing. When I looked back at the water, the reflection was gone. That was the last night I camped near any national park, because I finally understood the truth. The lost campers never vanish into the forest. They dissolve out of our version of it. And maybe the forest doesn't steal them. It remembers them too vividly to let go. Maybe it's remembering me now. You ever realize a place can remember you better than any person ever could? That's what it felt like driving out of Mount St. Helens. Every bend in the road, every mile marker looked familiar in a way that shouldn't have been possible. I knew I'd never driven that route before, but my hands turned the wheel before I even thought about it, like the forest was steering me home. I tried to make sense of it, told myself it was fatigue, dehydration, too much time on the road. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. I didn't feel like I was leaving. I felt like I was being escorted. The rain picked up again, that cold Pacific drizzle that never stops, only thickens. My wipers squealed uselessly. The fog swallowed the tree line until there was nothing but gray. For a long time, I didn't see another car, another light, another sign of civilization. Just the endless, damp wilderness. Then, through the fog, a glow. I slowed down. It wasn't a car, it was a campfire, burning alone in a pullout beside the road. I almost drove past, but something made me stop. I think it was the fact that there were chairs around it, 3 of them, empty. The fire shouldn't have been burning that clean. The wood looked soaked, but the flames were bright, tall, almost too still. I cut the engine and sat there for a long minute, just watching. And then I saw movement. A figure stepped into the glow from the opposite side. A man, or what looked like one. He wore a poncho slick with rain, head tilted down so his face stayed hidden. He didn't look up at me, just sat down in one of the chairs. Another figure followed. A woman, I think, judging by the frame. She took the second chair. The third stayed empty. I don't know why I got out of the van. Maybe I wanted to break the loneliness. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that these were real people, not shapes my mind had conjured from fog. When I stepped out, the air felt too warm. The smell of the fire was wrong. It wasn't wood. It was sweet, like burnt sap or hair. The man finally turned his head toward me. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the glint of eyes reflecting the flames. He raised a hand and pointed to the empty chair. "Stay a while," he said. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried in a way that dug under my skin. Familiar. I walked closer, every instinct screaming at me to stop, but curiosity pulling harder. Up close, the chairs were old, metal frames with the paint flaking off. The fire didn't give off heat, it just shimmered, and the ground around it wasn't wet. Not even the grass. The woman looked at me, and for a second I forgot to breathe. Because I knew that face. I'd seen it before in one of the missing posters tacked to a ranger bulletin board in Forks. Her name was Lila Henriksen, disappeared in 1998, but she didn't look a day older than the photo. She smiled faintly, lips cracked, and said, "It's quieter here." I couldn't answer. My throat felt tight, like the air itself was pressing against it. I stepped back and the man stood. His poncho rippled like water, and when he moved, the light from the fire flickered through him. That was enough. I turned and ran for the van. As soon as I shut the door, every window fogged over from the inside. The air grew thick with that same smell, damp, earth, rot, rain that never dries. Through the windshield, the campfire flared. The figures stood side by side now, motionless. Then, without wind or sound, the fire collapsed into itself, gone. The night swallowed everything. When I started the van, the clock on the dashboard read 12:03 a.m. I hadn't been there more than 10 minutes, but the next morning, when I finally reached a diner near Morton, the waitress told me it was Thursday. I'd left Rainier on Monday. 3 days. Gone. I wanted to leave the Northwest after that. I even tried. I drove south, past Portland, thinking I could outdrive whatever this was. But no matter which direction I went, the signs started repeating. Forks 67 miles, Quinault 42 miles, Hoh Rainforest entrance ahead. The roads looped back into each other. I'd stop for gas, and the attendant would say, "Didn't you just come through here yesterday?" But I hadn't. Or maybe I had. That night, I parked by a clearing near the coast and decided to record everything, every sound, every whisper. I left the recorder outside again. The rain started, steady and slow. When I played it back later, I heard it, not voices this time. Breathing. Mine and someone else's. 2 rhythms overlapping, then a faint click. The sound of the van door opening. My blood ran cold. I looked around. The doors were locked, but the passenger seat was wet. A shape pressed into the cushion. That's when I realized the yellow raincoat was gone. I found it 2 days later hanging from a tree branch near my campsite. Perfectly dry. The same tag, Camp 47 Outfitters, but now there was something written on it in black marker. You said you'd stay. That was the first time I cried since all this started. Not from fear. Fear had already burned itself out. But from the sick realization that whatever had taken those people wasn't done yet. It didn't just want me lost. It wanted me remembered. I started dreaming again, always the same trail, always the same voices, and always the same destination. That buried Volkswagen at Camp 47, waiting in the dark like a mirror I hadn't finished looking into. I'd wake up gasping, the smell of moss in my throat. Once, I woke to find dirt under my fingernails and my boots soaked. I don't remember leaving the van, but I do remember what I heard just before dawn that morning. Soft, close, right by my ear. You're almost home. It wasn't my brother's voice anymore. It was mine. I don't remember deciding to drive back toward Camp 47. It felt less like a choice and more like momentum, like gravity pulling me home. The rain followed, but that's nothing new in the Pacific Northwest. Out here, the rain doesn't stop. It just changes shape. Sometimes it falls, sometimes it hangs in the air like breath, and sometimes it moves against the wind. By the time I reached the fork where the old sign should have been, the forest had already started to swallow the road. Grass and moss grew right over the gravel, and the trail markers were gone, scraped off as if by claws or knives. I stopped the van and sat there, engine humming, staring at the dark mouth of the trail ahead. Every instinct told me to turn around. Every sane part of me screamed to leave. But I couldn't. I'd been hearing my name whispered through the vents for days. It didn't matter how loud I turned up the radio or how fast I drove, it always came through. Evan. Soft, rhythmic, patient. I killed the engine and stepped out. The air was thick, damp, and strangely still. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to have stopped watching. I walked a few yards down the overgrown trail, flashlight cutting thin tunnels through the fog. After about 100 feet, I started seeing them. Shapes in the mud, handprints, dozens of them. Pressed deep into the earth, fingers spread, palms downward, all facing toward the forest interior. They weren't old either. The water still pooled in some of them. My stomach twisted, but I kept walking. I don't know why. Maybe because fear isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. You go in circles until you can't tell if you're chasing the truth or being led to it. The deeper I went, the more wrong the air felt. It was heavier, yes, but there was also a pulse. Like the ground itself was breathing beneath my boots. I heard dripping somewhere ahead, steady, deliberate. When I found the source, my flashlight trembled. There it was, the old Volkswagen camper. The same one I'd seen months ago, except now it wasn't half buried anymore. It was sitting perfectly upright, clean, like it had just been parked there. The mud around the tires was smooth, fresh, and the door was open. The smell hit first, that same rot from before, but sweeter now, like decay mixed with wet cedar. I called out, stupidly. Hello? Something moved inside, a shuffle, then a faint thunk, like someone setting a cup down on the counter. I should have run, but the sound wasn't threatening, it was familiar. I took a step closer, then another, until my flashlight beam caught the interior. Everything was the same as before, the camera, the dishes, the notebook. Only this time, the notebook wasn't empty. A new page lay open with fresh ink bleeding through the paper. It read, "Welcome back, Evan." My throat closed. The pen was still resting beside it, damp, like it had just been used. I backed away slowly, shaking my head, trying to breathe. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy, wet. I spun around, shining my light through the fog. It hit a shape, a figure. A man standing a few yards away, half obscured by mist. His clothes were soaked, his face hidden under dripping hair. But I recognized him instantly. It was me, or rather, something wearing my shape. He tilted his head just slightly, the same way I do when I'm trying to focus a shot. Then he smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't monstrous. It was the kind of small, polite smile you give a stranger who's about to make a terrible mistake. I stepped back, but my heel caught on a root and I went down hard. The flashlight tumbled, beam spinning across the trees. When it landed, there wasn't one of him anymore. There were several. Half a dozen silhouettes, all shaped like me, standing at the edge of the fog, not moving, not blinking, just waiting. Then, one by one, they began to whisper. Not words. Not at first, just breath sounds. Inhale, inhale. Then the voices layered together, repeating my name until it wasn't a name anymore. It was rhythm. A heartbeat. Evan, Evan, Evan. I scrambled back toward my van, slipping in the mud, tearing my hands on the roots. The moment I slammed the door and turned the key, the fog surged against the windows like a living thing. The engine screamed, coughed, caught, and then the radio switched on by itself. Static. Then a voice. Mine. It said, "You shouldn't have left us." Every hair on my neck stood up. I floored it, tearing down the trail, branches scraping the roof. The fog followed, twisting in the headlights like tendrils trying to hold on. By the time I reached the main road, my chest felt like it was caving in. I drove for what felt like hours before I saw a sign for civilization again, a ranger station. I pulled in, shaking, headlights cutting across the empty lot. There were vehicles there, parked in neat rows, all Volkswagens, all different colors, all empty. Every single one of them had condensation on the windows, like someone had been sitting inside, breathing only moments before. And in the glass of my own windshield, I saw them, the reflections, not behind me, not around me, inside the van. Dozens of faces, all mine. I turned off the ignition, and for the first time since this all began, I sat perfectly still. No breath, no sound. Then a whisper brushed the back of my neck. "You're one of us now." The lights of the ranger station flickered and died. And in that brief darkness, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit until that moment. I wasn't documenting the story anymore. I was finishing it. When the lights went out, the only thing left was the rain, the same constant, whispering rain that had followed me from the first night at Quinault. Except now it wasn't falling from above. It was coming from inside the van, sliding down the glass in tiny trails, forming words I couldn't quite read. For a moment, I thought about staying, about letting the fog finish what it started. There's a strange peace and surrender when you've been running too long. But then the lightning flashed, and I saw it again. Rows of empty Volkswagens stretching out into the mist, all pointed in the same direction, like they were waiting for something, waiting for me to join them. That broke whatever trance I was in. I slammed the van into reverse, skidding through puddles, tires spitting gravel. The fog thinned for just a second, just long enough for me to see the road leading downhill. I didn't look back. But even as I drove, I could feel it. Something inside the van shifting. The seat behind me creaked like someone had just leaned forward. The rearview mirror trembled. I didn't want to look. God, I didn't. But I did. There was nothing there. Not at first. Then, in the mirror's reflection, a faint outline, a shape sitting perfectly still in the back seat. Same hair, same jacket, same face. Me. Only this version wasn't panicked. He was calm, almost serene. He lifted his hand and pointed at the road ahead, and for reasons I still can't explain, I listened. The road twisted and dropped, then opened into a wide clearing I didn't remember being there before. The fog glowed faintly, pale as bone, and in that glow I saw figures moving. People. Some in ponchos, some in hiking gear, some barefoot and pale as paper. They weren't walking toward me. They were walking past me, all of them heading into the same direction. The tree line beyond the clearing, all of them silent, all of them familiar. Faces from missing posters, from newspaper clippings, from memories I shouldn't have had. As I passed, one of them turned. A woman with short blonde hair, eyes milky and blank. She smiled and mouthed something. "Thank you." Then she vanished into the fog. I kept driving. Faster now. The trees bent in around me, their branches arching overhead like ribs. The air turned colder, sharper, as though the world itself was thinning. Every sound in the forest blended together, the wind, the rain, the tires, the whispering voices, until it all became one endless hum, and beneath that hum, a heartbeat. Not mine, not human. It came from the earth, deep and patient, like something enormous asleep beneath the moss. That's when the road ended. Literally, just stopped. A wall of fallen timber and stone, no warning, no sign. I slammed the brakes and the van fishtailed, sliding sideways until it came to a shuddering halt inches from the edge. The front wheels hovered over open air. Below me, nothing but fog and blackness. I sat there shaking, knuckles white on the wheel, breathing in the damp smell of rot and old water. And then I heard it again, soft but distinct, a child's laugh. That same laugh from the Hoh rainforest, months ago. I stepped out into the rain, feet sinking into mud. Every sound around me fell away. The fog ahead of me stirred, and from within it a small figure emerged. A child in a yellow raincoat, mud up to their knees, head tilted upward. They stopped about 10 feet away and raised one hand. The rain didn't touch them. I opened my mouth, but no words came. The child smiled. Then, in my own voice, they said, "You came back." I stumbled backward. My heel caught the wet ground and I fell, hands sinking into something soft. I looked down. The soil wasn't soil anymore. It was carpet, brown, matted carpet, and the fog around me wasn't fog. It was smoke. I was back inside my van. Engine still idling, my flashlight on the dash, flickering weakly. The child was gone. The raincoat lay folded on the passenger seat, perfectly clean. I don't know how much time passed, maybe hours, maybe days. When I finally started the engine and drove again, I didn't care where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. I ended up at a rest stop somewhere along Highway 101. Morning light filtered weakly through the clouds, pale and cold. The world looked normal again. Cars passed, birds sang. My reflection in the window looked like mine again, except for one small thing. My eyes weren't the same color anymore. They were lighter, almost gray, like the mist. I sat there for a long time, engine off, staring at my own face until the glass fogged over. I wiped it clear, and for a brief second, I thought I saw someone else behind me in the reflection, a man sitting in the driver's seat of another van, parked just behind mine, looking straight at me. Then he blinked, and I realized it wasn't another man. It was me. Only when I turned around, the lot was empty. That's when I finally understood. The lost campers never disappear from the Pacific Northwest. They dissolve into it, bit by bit, memory by memory, reflection by reflection. It doesn't take you all at once. It waits. It follows you home. It listens every time you say, "I miss the rain," because the moment you say that out loud, the forest hears you, and it remembers. So if you ever find yourself out here, parked somewhere between the coast and the mountains, and you wake to 3 soft knocks on your camper door, don't open it. Don't answer, because whoever's calling your name in that rain might not be someone looking for help. It might just be the forest asking you to stay. And once you do, it never lets you leave. I'd been driving for 16 hours straight before I finally pulled off that mountain road. The fog was swallowing the tree line, rolling in waves across the cracked asphalt like a living thing, and I remember thinking it looked almost beautiful, how something so quiet could feel so heavy. I'd been hauling gear through Idaho for nearly a week, sleeping in the back of my old Volkswagen Westphalia, that faded teal van that had carried me through more nights than I could count. I'd converted it years ago. Tiny sink, fold-out bed, a shortwave radio bolted to the dash. I told myself I'd slow down someday, but it never really happened. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd find when I stopped moving. That night, I was headed toward the Bitterroots, somewhere past an old town called Elk Hollow that didn't show up on my GPS. The road signs had been shot up or rusted beyond use, and the only sound besides the hum of my tires was that steady, faint whistle of wind squeezing through the cracks in the van's weather stripping. I hadn't seen another vehicle in hours. Just me, the fog, and that long, winding 2-lane cutting through the forest. I was tired enough to start seeing shapes in the mist. Faces, or maybe just tricks of the headlights. I caught myself drifting into those half-dream thoughts that creep up when you're too exhausted to know what's real. That's when the radio came alive. It was faint at first, just static like rain against glass. I almost didn't notice. But then a voice, flat, calm, and strangely clear, cut through the noise. Good evening, Elk County. This is WZQR 104.9 FM, broadcasting your late-night weather update for Friday, November 10th, 1983. I blinked. My hand froze on the wheel. 1983. The voice kept going, giving a forecast that didn't make sense, talking about temperatures dropping into the teens, about a blizzard rolling down from Canada, about a storm front moving fast enough to cut the power grid before sunrise. I looked out the window. It wasn't snowing. It was October, and 1983 was 40 years ago. I laughed out loud just to shake it off. Maybe some retro station playing an old tape, I thought. A collector's broadcast, or maybe a prank. I adjusted the tuner slightly, but every turn brought me back to the same signal. Same voice. Same calm tone that sounded too even, like something that had been pre-recorded by someone who didn't breathe. The air in the van felt colder. I turned off the engine, thinking I'd let it rest, but the static didn't stop. The radio was still on, still humming with that low electric buzz. That shouldn't have been possible. My Westie was old enough that when the ignition died, so did the power. I switched it off manually, and the silence that followed was thick enough to feel. For a long moment, I just sat there in the dark, watching the fog press against the windshield, the trees barely visible through the pale light of the moon. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a signal bounce, maybe some atmospheric interference. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I pulled into a clearing a few hundred yards up the road. There was an old sign half buried in the mud, the paint peeled down to the wood. Elk Hollow Campground, Est, 1978. The gate was still standing, but the chains had rusted through. No one had been here in years. I set up camp anyway. I'd driven too long to keep going. I parked near the edge of a small pond, killed the headlights, and let the dark swallow the van. My hands were trembling when I killed the engine, though I wasn't sure if it was from cold or nerves. The air outside had a sharpness that didn't match the season, metallic and sweet, like ozone before a lightning strike. I made a small fire beside the van, cooked a can of soup on my camp stove, and told myself to stop thinking about the radio. But I couldn't shake it. That voice had stuck to me like a smell, calm and factual and completely detached. When I climbed into the van to sleep, I noticed something else. The radio light had turned back on. I hadn't touched it. It was glowing faint blue, the needle locked dead center on 104.9. This is your midnight emergency update. The storm has intensified. Local authorities are urging all residents of Elk Hollow to remain indoors. Do not attempt to travel north toward Ridge Creek. Visibility is 0, and the bridge at Hollow Pass has collapsed. The air left my lungs. Ridge Creek was less than 10 miles from where I was parked. I leaned closer to the speaker, every instinct in me screaming to shut it off, but I couldn't. The transmission crackled, breaking for a moment into what sounded like distant wind or voices. I caught a faint sound in the background, like someone whispering too close to the microphone. Then the voice returned. Casualties have been reported on Route 12. Stay tuned for further updates every 15 minutes. There was no Route 12 anywhere near me. I checked my paper map by flashlight, tracing the mountain roads with my finger. Nothing, just unnamed Forest Service roads, some of them long since closed. That was when I noticed something strange outside the window. The fog was moving, not drifting like smoke, but shifting, curling in deliberate patterns like something was stirring it from within. And through it, I thought I saw the faintest red glow pulsing slowly, almost in rhythm with my heartbeat. The sound of the radio began to distort. The voice dropped half an octave, slowed, and became almost mechanical. Wind speed increasing. Estimated loss of communication by 0130 hours. Repeat, loss of communication imminent. Then silence. For the first time that night, I turned everything off. The radio. the lights, even my phone. I sat there in total darkness, listening to my own breathing, and for a moment I thought maybe it was over. Then, from somewhere out in the trees came the faint sound of static. Not from the van, from the woods. It was distant, like a radio being tuned just out of range, carried on the wind, and underneath that static was something worse. The slow, deliberate rhythm of a voice speaking through layers of interference, too muffled to make out the words, but too human to mistake. I stepped outside, the cold biting through my jacket, and looked toward the sound. The fog was thicker now, pooled between the trees in soft, shifting bands. The glow I'd seen before was still there, closer now, flickering like an old neon sign. I should have gone back inside. I should have locked the door, turned on the engine, and driven until daylight. But I didn't. I took a flashlight, stepped off the dirt road, and walked toward that glow. The static grew louder the closer I got. My flashlight beam cut through the fog in short bursts, catching branches, empty beer cans, and the glint of something metallic lying half buried in the dirt. When I knelt to look, I realized it was an old transistor radio, cracked open, its wires stripped clean. The battery compartment was filled with dried mud, and yet it was still on. Static hissed from its speaker, thin but constant. Then a faint click, and that same voice returned, tinny and warped. Time of death confirmed at 0130 hours. Search parties have been dispatched to recover the missing vehicle. I froze. The missing vehicle. The voice repeated it again. One missing vehicle, Volkswagen camper van, teal. My flashlight shook in my hand. I looked back toward where my van should have been, but the fog had swallowed everything. And then I heard it, the sound of my own radio turning itself back on, somewhere through the mist, followed by that calm, even voice saying my name, Lucas. I don't remember dropping the flashlight, but I remember the sound it made when it hit the ground, the thud of plastic against dirt, and then nothing but the static. I didn't tell anyone this part for years. Not because I was afraid of being called crazy, I'd already made peace with that, but because some part of me still believed that speaking it aloud would make it real again. That voice, the one that came through the fog that night, it didn't sound like a recording anymore. It sounded like someone standing a few feet away, whispering directly into the air around me. I remember whispering back. Some stupid reflex, like when you hear your name and automatically answer. "Who is this?" I said, but the only response was static, rolling and popping like distant thunder. Then after a few seconds, the voice came again, still calm, still measured. "Do not attempt to move the vehicle. Repeat, do not attempt to move the vehicle. Remain where you are." That was when I ran. I don't remember deciding to. My legs just took over. I sprint through the fog toward where I thought the van was parked, but the trees looked wrong. Closer together, warped by the mist. My boots slipped in the mud, and the sound of my breath grew sharp, ragged. I could see the faint glow of my dashboard lights through the fog, but it flickered, like a reflection on water. When I reached the van, I flung the door open and climbed inside. The radio was on full volume, the dial still frozen on 104.9. But now the voice wasn't giving weather reports. It was reading coordinates: latitude 46.7 degrees north, longitude 114.9 degrees west, estimated time of collapse 7 minutes. Collapse. I grabbed the ignition key, turned it, nothing. The engine coughed once and died. I tried again, pumping the gas, but all I got was a hollow click, like something deep in the wiring had been severed. The headlights flickered on for half a second, just long enough for me to see movement in the fog outside. A figure, barely visible through the white, standing about 20 feet away. No light, no sound, just stillness. My first thought was that it was another camper, maybe someone stranded or a ranger. But when I shouted, "Hey!" the figure didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there. Then, slowly, it lifted one arm and pointed straight at me. My breath caught. The radio hissed again, louder now, distorting into a wall of noise. Through the static came faint voices, multiple, overlapping, like a dozen conversations happening at once, all slightly out of sync. Then the announcer's voice cut through them, calm as ever. Signal confirmed. You are being received. The figure in the fog tilted its head slightly like it was listening. Then it started walking toward the van. I panicked, slammed the lock, grabbed my flashlight, and turned it toward the windshield. The beam hit the fog and scattered, but for an instant I saw its face. Or rather, I saw mine. Not exactly. A distortion of it. Like looking into an old, warping mirror that couldn't decide what decade it belonged to. The same jawline, same scar above the eyebrow, but the eyes were wrong. They were empty. No pupils, no whites, just dull reflections of the radio light flickering across the glass. I screamed without sound, shoved the van door open on the other side, and bolted into the woods. Branches tore at my jacket. My flashlight swung wildly, throwing glimpses of trunks, roots, and wet ground. I didn't stop running until the static faded behind me, replaced by the low hum of wind through pine. I collapsed by a fallen tree, gasping, my heart slamming against my ribs. The air tasted metallic, sharp, like the smell right before lightning hits. I remember pressing my hands to the dirt just to feel something solid, something real. That's when I heard it again. The voice, only this time, not through the radio. It came from all around me, threaded through the air like sound carried by vibration. Stormfront advancing. Estimated time of impact, 2 minutes. I looked up. Through the fog, I saw lights flickering high above the tree line. Pale, silent, moving too slowly to be lightning, but too fast to be stars. They pulsed in rhythm with the voice, dimming and brightening like a living frequency. The air pressure dropped so suddenly my ears popped. The trees bent as if pushed by a wind I couldn't feel. Then, out of the static, a different sound emerged, something human. A woman's voice, faint, trembling, layered beneath the transmission. Please, if anyone can hear this, we didn't make it through. The bridge. It cut off. The announcer's tone returned, almost cheerful. Casualties confirmed. Highway 12 remains closed indefinitely. Thank you for tuning in to WZQR, where the past is never truly gone. I stumbled backward. My head was pounding, my vision tunneling. I remember the world tilting, the trees bending in impossible ways as that low hum filled my skull. Then everything went white. When I came to, it was morning. The fog was gone, the air was still. I was lying next to my van, half buried in pine needles, the door wide open. The radio was silent, my fire pit had burned out to cold ash. I stood, shaking, looking around for any sign of the figure. The radio in the woods, anything. But the clearing was empty. I started the van. The engine turned over like nothing had happened. I drove until I reached the next town, a small place called Clearwater Ridge. I pulled into a diner, ordered coffee, and asked the waitress if she'd ever heard of WZQR 104.9. She frowned. That old thing? Haven't heard that call sign in ages. Used to be a local AM station out of Elk Hollow, but that went off air decades ago. Some folks said the tower collapsed during that freak blizzard in the 80s. Why? I just shook my head. No reason. She smiled politely and walked away. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window at the bright blue sky that felt wrong after so much darkness. Before I left, I pulled out my phone to check the weather. Clear skies, it said. 55 degrees. No storms expected for weeks. But when I started the van again, the radio came on by itself, just for a moment, and through the static, that calm voice whispered, "Next update, scheduled for tonight." I killed the ignition and sat there until my hands stopped shaking. That was the last time I went camping alone. That was the last time I listened to anything on 104.9. But sometimes, especially when I'm parked in the quiet, if I leave the van running just long enough, I can still hear it beneath the hum of the engine, the faint crackle of static, and that voice saying my name. And if I listen too long, it starts to sound like it's coming from inside the van. A few months passed before I could bring myself to drive through those mountains again. I told myself it had been exhaustion, dehydration, maybe even some kind of auditory hallucination brought on by the fog and lack of sleep. I wanted to believe that, truly. But deep down, there was something about that night I couldn't rationalize. The way the voice had said my name before I'd ever spoken it aloud, the way it knew the color of my van, The way the forecast it gave that night had come true 2 weeks later, exactly as it was described. Yeah, that's the part I haven't told anyone. 2 weeks after I'd left the Bitterroots, I saw the headline online, "Historic Blizzard Cuts Power Across Idaho Panhandle." The article listed the affected regions: Elk County, Ridge Creek, Clearwater Ridge, same towns, same storm path, same date that broadcast had mentioned. The only thing that didn't match was the year. It wasn't 1983 anymore. I tried to laugh it off, but every night after that, I'd wake up at exactly 1:30 a.m., the same time the radio had gone dead that night. No dreams, no noise, just the sense that something was waiting for me to wake up. And in the silence after, when the world felt suspended, I could hear a faint hum, like a frequency just below what human hearing was meant to catch. After the third week, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know if WZQR 104.9 was real, or if I'd somehow tuned into something else that night, something that wasn't supposed to exist. So I went back. I told myself it was just to prove a point, to silence that gnawing thought that maybe, just maybe, I'd crossed paths with something more than static. I packed the van with the same gear as before, same route, same roads. But this time, I planned to stay off-grid for 3 nights to see if the signal would come back. The first night was calm, cold but normal. The stars were clear above the pines, and I parked near a small lake west of where Elk Hollow used to be. According to my GPS, the campground didn't exist anymore. It was marked as restricted access, no maintenance, just a patch of green on the map where no road led. But the strangest part, my radio still had that station preset saved, 104.9. I hadn't touched it since that night. The button label was worn, but the display glowed faintly when I pressed it. Static filled the van, no voice, no music, just that soft, distant hiss. It followed me to sleep like white noise. But around midnight, I woke up. No sound at first, just that heavy, low silence of mountain air before dawn. Then I noticed the radio light had changed. The dial was glowing red instead of blue, and the sound wasn't static anymore. It was breathing. Slow, deep, mechanical. Inhale, exhale, as if the van itself was alive. I leaned forward, holding my breath, and for a moment, I swear I heard my own name again, drawn out through the speaker in a low, distorted echo. Lucas. I hit the power button. Nothing. The sound didn't stop. I pulled the plug from the dash, still breathing. The radio wasn't even connected to power anymore. That's when I smelled it again, the same metallic tang from that night months ago. Ozone, like air after lightning. My skin prickled. I opened the van door to step outside, but before my foot hit the ground, a flicker of light passed across the trees to my right. A flash like headlights, but there was no road there. And then the radio crackled back to life. "Good evening, Elk County," the voice said, steady and calm. "This is WZQR 104.9 FM broadcasting your late-night weather update for November 10th, 1983. The date hadn't changed. I froze. My breath clouded in front of me. It wasn't even November. It was March. But the voice kept talking, describing conditions exactly as I remembered. Wind gusts increasing near Ridge Creek. Power failures reported near the southern range. Stay tuned for updates every 15 minutes. And behind that, faintly, like another recording overlapping, came a sound I hadn't heard before. My own voice. "Please, if anyone can hear this, I'm at the campground by the pond. The fog." The rest was swallowed by static. I stumbled backwards, slamming into the van door. My voice, my words. A transmission I'd never made. I turned the tuner rapidly, desperate to break the connection, but the needle wouldn't move. It was stuck on 104.9. And then, just for an instant, the static cleared, and I heard someone else whisper through the signal, their voice warped but human. "You're not supposed to be here yet." The air felt wrong, dense, charged, like gravity itself had shifted. My reflection in the side mirror rippled, slightly out of sync with me. When I turned my head, it turned a fraction of a second later. I grabbed my keys, ready to start the van to drive anywhere else. But when I twisted the ignition, the headlights came on and illuminated something standing just beyond the beam's edge. It was a man, or the shape of one. Still pale, the color of snow under moonlight, his face was turned toward me. Though I couldn't see his eyes, only the faint shimmer of light reflecting off his skin. His mouth opened, and though I couldn't hear it, I saw it form a word. My name. And in that exact moment, the radio cut out. Total silence. Then, a few seconds later, a different broadcast started. Breaking report, the announcer said. Local authorities have recovered a missing vehicle near Elk Hollow Campground, believed to belong to one Lucas W. I didn't let it finish. I threw the van into reverse, the tires spitting dirt and pine needles, and I drove. I didn't care where. I just needed distance. The radio stayed dead, the red glow fading to black, until finally, hours later, I saw the first flicker of dawn on the horizon. When I finally stopped, I was miles from where I'd started. My phone still had no signal. My clock read 1:30 a.m. Again. I sat there in silence, watching the sun rise, realizing that somehow time had broken around me, or maybe I had crossed into some loop I wasn't supposed to touch. And that's when the static started again. Not from the radio this time, from behind me, from the back of the van. I froze, every nerve in my body straining to make sense of that sound coming from behind me. It wasn't loud, just a faint hiss, like a speaker warming up, catching a signal that wasn't supposed to exist in the air around us. I turned slowly, expecting to see the radio light flickering again, but the dash was dark. The engine was still off. The static grew louder. I twisted in my seat and looked toward the back of the van. There was nothing there, just my folded bedding, a backpack, and the aluminum coffee mug I'd left rolling around on the floor. But the sound was definitely coming from inside, a low rhythmic crackle that shifted pitch every few seconds, like it was searching for something. Then I realized the sound wasn't from a speaker at all. It was coming from my walkie. I hadn't touched that thing in months. It was an old CB radio I kept for emergencies, clipped to the panel near the kitchenette. It shouldn't have even been on, but the green light blinked faintly, flickering like a pulse. I reached for it, hesitating halfway, afraid that if I picked it up, I'd hear that voice again. But the longer I waited, the louder the static became, until finally I grabbed it. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse. For a moment, there was nothing but the hiss. Copy, copy. It was my own voice. "Who is this?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear something human. "Lucas," the voice said. "You can't stay." I gripped the device so tightly my fingers ached. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The response came through broken, splintered by interference. "You didn't make it through the bridge, leave the mountain." The radio cut off. The light died. And in the silence that followed, I heard another sound, so subtle it took me a few seconds to recognize it. Footsteps, soft ones, slow, coming from the direction of the forest behind the van. I turned in my seat and looked out the rear window. The morning light had barely reached the tree line, and everything was washed in that cold gray that comes just before sunrise. Between the trunks, something was moving. Not fast, just deliberate, swaying slightly as it stepped closer. The sound of boots on wet ground. But they didn't echo right. It was as if the footsteps were slightly out of sync with the movement, delayed by half a second, like the sound was catching up to its source. I didn't think. I started the engine. The van roared to life, the old pistons vibrating through the steering column. I slammed it into gear and pulled onto the narrow gravel road, dirt spraying behind me. The rearview mirror caught a glimpse of the tree line, and for a split second, I saw something I'll never forget. A figure, standing perfectly still at the edge of the forest, watching me go, its head tilted to the side as if listening. Then, in the faintest reflection of the rear window, I saw its mouth move. My name again. I didn't stop driving for 2 hours. I didn't even care that the van rattled every time I hit a bend. The farther I got from that mountain, the clearer my head felt. But the radio stayed dead. Not even static. When I finally pulled into a gas station near St. Marie's, I stepped out on shaky legs, went inside, and asked the cashier if he'd ever heard of WZQR 104.9. He was a kid, maybe 20, with sleepy eyes and a faded ball cap. He frowned. "WZQR?" he said, scratching his chin. "Nah, Can't say I have. Closest local station around here is 103.7. Why? I told him I must have picked up an old signal, something weird from the mountains. He shrugged. Yeah, that happens sometimes. Atmospherics, right? Signals bouncing off the atmosphere from old transmissions. He smiled, clearly trying to make me feel better. Sometimes they even carry voices from like decades ago. Creepy, but kind of cool. From the 80s? I asked quietly. He nodded. Sure. Weirdest part? Some people say those signals don't fade. They just keep looping. I didn't sleep that night. I parked behind the station, shut off the van, and stared at the radio until sunrise. No noise, no light. But when I finally turned the key again, the dashboard clock blinked 1:30 a.m. every time. That's when it hit me. What if it wasn't a warning about the weather? What if that broadcast wasn't predicting storms at all? What if it was recording something that hadn't happened yet, capturing echoes from a point in time I hadn't reached? Or worse, what if I was the echo? I drove home, trying to shake the thought, but the road felt wrong, too empty, too quiet. Every few miles, I'd think I saw headlights in the distance, but they never came closer. The static followed me all the way back to Spokane, faint but constant, buried deep under every frequency on the dial. That was months ago. Since then, I've sold the Westphalia, couldn't stand to keep it. The new owner messaged me last week, said everything worked fine except for one thing. The radio. He said it kept tuning itself to 104.9 every night around 1:30, even when he unplugged it. Said he thought it was some electrical glitch, maybe leftover wiring, but then he asked something that made my stomach drop. He said, "Hey man, weird question, but why is your name carved into the underside of the dashboard? Looks old." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Now every night I lie awake and listen to the hum of traffic outside my apartment, waiting for that familiar sound to rise beneath it, the faint hiss of a frequency trying to find me again. Sometimes, when everything goes still, I swear I can hear it, just a whisper of static leaking through the walls, accompanied by a voice so calm it almost sounds comforting. Good evening, Elk County, and then stay tuned. My name's Caleb Mercer. I'm 41, and for the better part of 10 years, I've been living out of my old Volkswagen Westphalia. It's not glamorous, not like the Instagram reels make it seem. The engine knocks on cold mornings. The curtains smell faintly of mildew. Sometimes, when the desert wind blows just right, I can taste rust in the air. But this van, this battered, stubborn home, has carried me to corners of America where maps fade into rumor. And in those places, I started hearing stories. Not ghost stories, not the campfire kind where everyone laughs after pretending to scream. These were quiet stories, whispered by rangers with tired eyes and locals who'd rather forget. Stories about people who drove into national parks and never came back. At first, I dismissed them as accidents. America's wild spaces are merciless to the unprepared. A single slip on a trail, a washed-out road, a fuel gauge ignored, and you can vanish without anyone hearing a sound. But over time, patterns began to emerge. I'd roll into a campground, plug in my coffee maker, and someone would mention another disappearance, another Volkswagen, another traveler who looked like me. The first time I really felt the weight of it was in Utah, Goblin Valley. You've probably seen it in photos. Red rock hoodoos shaped like melting faces, shadows twisting with the sun. I'd parked near the back lot, away from the families and tourists. The night air smelled like iron and sage. A ranger came by just before sunset, a tall woman, sunburned and quiet. She leaned on my driver's door and said, "Don't wander too far tonight. The rocks play tricks." I laughed, thinking it was small talk. She didn't laugh back. Later, while I cooked ramen over my camp stove, I noticed her truck headlights still cutting through the distance, engine idling, watching. Around midnight, the desert went silent. You know that kind of silence, the kind that feels designed. No crickets, no wind through brush, not even the creak of the van's frame, just stillness so heavy it pressed against my eardrums. Then I heard it, a faint rattle like a keychain brushing metal. It came from under the van. Now, I've lived long enough on the road to know every sound a Westphalia makes, The radiator gurgle, the squeak of the pop-top hinges. But this was different. Too deliberate. I slid open the door, flashlight in hand. The beam hit the dust, and for half a second I caught a shape. A hand? No, something thinner, like a sleeve dragging across the ground. By the time I knelt down, it was gone. I slept with the flashlight still on that night, and in the morning I found small impressions under the van. Barefoot. Human-sized. When I told the ranger, she looked at me the way you look at a lost dog, sympathetic, but certain it'll never find its way home. She said, "You're not the first to see that." Then she walked away. That encounter could have been brushed off as paranoia, but it set something loose in me, a kind of hunger. Over the next year, I began tracing these disappearances, driving from park to park, campground to campground, piecing together names, dates, places. It wasn't just Utah. There were others: Yosemite, Crater Lake, the Smokies. Each had its own vanished campers, and strangely, many of them had owned old RVs or Volkswagens. Not brand new rigs, but the kind you restore out of nostalgia or escape. In every case, someone remembered them saying the same words before they vanished. "I just need one more night here." I didn't believe in curses or patterns, but I wanted to understand. So I made a map. Push pins spread across the dashboard, connected by thin red thread. I started sleeping with my journal open, transcribing stories from anyone who'd talk. Retired rangers, janitors, locals. Their details were inconsistent, but the tone was always the same. Pity, resignation, fear. Last summer I reached Northern California, Shasta Trinity. That's where everything started to blur between investigation and experience. The forest there feels ancient, like the trees have been waiting longer than humans have existed. The air carries a deep, resinous scent, heavy and damp. Even my headlights seemed swallowed by it. I found a free campsite down a logging road, far from the main highway. The dirt was soft, the kind that leaves tire impressions like fossils. No signal, no sound, just the rhythmic hiss of the wind through pines. That night, as I read through my notes, I noticed something that stopped my breath cold. Every story, every disappearance had occurred within a single lunar cycle of another, roughly 28 days apart. I flipped through pages until my hands shook. My last stop, Goblin Valley? 28 days before the next on the list, Shasta Trinity. That's when the smell hit me, wet metal, like old blood in the rain. I stepped outside. My flashlight caught movement between the trees, slow, deliberate, as if testing how much I'd notice. The beam landed on something white, half buried in the moss. A license plate. I wiped the dirt away and froze. The tag was from Oregon, the same one I'd written about 2 months prior, a camper named Robert Weems who disappeared with his 1979 Volkswagen bus outside Crater Lake. I stepped back, heart hammering. That's when I heard the van's side door slide open behind me, except I'd locked it. The light trembled in my hand as I turned. Inside, the van was pitch black, but something was in there. I could hear it breathing, soft, wet, uneven. My mind tried to reason, maybe an animal, maybe a raccoon. I took a single step forward, the dirt giving a low crunch beneath my boots. The breathing stopped. I aimed the light inside. The driver's seat was empty. The floor was wet. And there, on the passenger seat, sat my own notebook, open to a page that hadn't existed before. Written in shaky letters, "I just need one more night here." My flashlight flickered, and the smell of iron deepened until it filled the back of my throat. I slammed the door, jumped in the driver's seat, and twisted the ignition. The van coughed once, twice, then died. That's when I saw it. In the side mirror beyond the trees, a figure standing exactly where I'd found the license plate. Barefoot, shoulders hunched, watching. When I looked again, it was gone. I don't remember sleeping, only the moment I woke up to daylight and silence. Everything inside the van was dry again. The notebook was closed. The license plate was gone. Part of me wanted to leave right then, but another part, the part that had kept me alive all these years, said I needed to know. I hiked out toward where the figure had been. The forest seemed to breathe around me, inhaling with every step I took. When I reached the clearing, I found a rusted van frame, half buried in ferns. The paint had long since peeled away, but the shape was unmistakable. A Volkswagen. Inside was a single object, an old Polaroid photograph taped to the dashboard. The image was faded, but I could make out a man standing beside a blue van identical to mine. He was smiling. Underneath, written in the same handwriting as the message in my notebook, was a date, 30 years ago to the day, and a name. Caleb Mercer. For a long time, I just stood there staring at that Polaroid, the forest breathing around me. I could hear sap popping in the trunks, like the trees themselves were straining to hold something back. My first thought wasn't horror, it was disbelief. Rationalization. I told myself someone must have planted it. Maybe some twisted joke from an overzealous true crime junkie who'd heard about my investigations. But the photo felt wrong in my hands. The edges were curled, weathered, and faintly warm, as if it hadn't been buried in the cold, damp earth, but waiting. The longer I held it, the more I realized something else. The man in that picture, me or whoever he was, had a scar over his right eyebrow. I don't. At least, I didn't think I did. I ran my fingers across my skin, and for a moment I swore I felt a faint ridge, almost invisible, but there. I dropped the photo, breathing fast, the edges of my vision tightening. Every sound in that forest suddenly seemed designed to mimic motion. Distant tapping, a slow crunch behind me that stopped when I turned. I walked back to my van with shaking hands, repeating out loud, "It's a coincidence. It's nothing." Inside, I started the engine again. It sputtered, then roared to life like nothing had happened. My notebook was still on the passenger seat, sealed shut. The smell of metal was gone. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. But when I reached the main road, the GPS glitched. The blue line froze, then redrew itself, pointing me down a different road entirely, a narrow asphalt stretch cutting deeper into the forest instead of toward the highway. And here's the thing. I followed it. That's what scares me most now when I think back. I didn't stop to question why a dead zone with no signal was suddenly giving me directions. I didn't hesitate when the voice said softly, "Turn left." I just obeyed, like I'd done it before. The road grew narrower, the trees closing in until their branches scraped the roof. The forest light dimmed to a steady dusk, even though the sun was high. My reflection in the windshield looked distorted, my face slightly off, mouth wrong, eyes too far apart. Eventually, the road opened into a clearing. At first, I thought it was an old ranger station. A cabin stood there, tilted, half-eaten by moss, with a sign hanging crookedly over the door. It read, "Camp Mercy, established 1979. My heart pounded. That year. The same year printed under my name in the photograph. I parked the van, killed the engine, and stepped out into an air so still it felt staged. The forest behind me closed up, the sounds folding inward like fabric. I walked toward the cabin. The wood groaned under my weight, the smell of rot and pine thick enough to sting. Inside, everything was frozen in time. A cracked lantern, a coffee mug fossilized in mold, a stack of ranger logs eaten halfway by termites. I brushed one open, its pages crumbling under my fingertips. Every entry was dated the same, August 17th, 1979. Each one described a single camper. Male, approximately 40, traveling alone, VW bus, parked near creek, says he's been here before. The last entry read, "He won't stop circling the campsite, says the road won't let him leave." My body went cold. I flipped through the rest. Dozens of pages, all the same handwriting, all the same day, repeating again and again. Then the pages turned blank. And then, right there in the center, in handwriting identical to mine, was a note. "You're late this time." I don't remember dropping the journal, but I remember the crash of thunder that followed, even though the sky outside was cloudless. The air buzzed like static. My skin prickled, every hair standing on end. I stumbled out the door and nearly fell down the steps. My van sat idling, though I hadn't left it running, headlights glowing against the trees. For a moment, I could swear I saw silhouettes moving through the light, figures stepping just close enough that I could make out their outlines before the beams flickered. And then the radio turned on. It was my voice. August 17th, 1979. I just need one more night here. I froze, the words looping, distorted. I yanked the radio fuse and the voice stopped, but not before I heard another line, muffled under static, "You always come back." The next thing I remember clearly was driving. My knuckles white on the wheel, speedometer edging past 70, road lines blurring like veins. I don't know how long I drove, but when the trees thinned and the sky turned gray, I found myself pulling into a small town gas station. A weathered man in a denim jacket came out to pump my gas. He looked at my van, then at me, and said, "Thought you sold that old thing years ago." I told him I just bought it. He frowned. "Funny, you look just like him." "Like who?" I asked. He leaned closer. "The guy who disappeared up by Camp Mercy. That was what, 79? Maybe 80? Folks around here still talk about him. Drove a Volkswagen just like yours. Never found him. Never found his van either." I tried to laugh, but it came out dry and brittle. Guess I've got his twin's taste in vehicles. The man didn't laugh back. He wiped his hands on a rag, gave a long look to the tree line, and muttered, "Just don't stay there overnight." He was still staring after me when I pulled out. That night, I parked in an open lot near the highway. I couldn't sleep, but I couldn't bring myself to drive either. I sat there replaying his words, that cabin, the journal. The air conditioner clicked in uneven rhythm, like a second heartbeat. Every so often I'd glance at the mirror and catch a flicker, someone sitting in the back seat, gone when I turned. By dawn, I decided I'd had enough. I was done with chasing patterns, done with ghost towns and vanishings. I told myself I'd sell the van, settle down, live like a normal man again. But then, as I stepped out to stretch, I noticed something new. A fresh dent in the side panel of the van, right under the window. Small, circular, as if pressed by a fingertip. The paint around it wasn't scratched, it was melted. I reached out, touched it. The metal was warm, and inside, tucked under the windshield wiper, was a Polaroid. A new one. This time, the image was of me, standing right where I was now, hand resting on the van. The caption read, "You made it back." I stared at that Polaroid for a long time. The morning light hit it at an angle that made the film's surface shimmer faintly, like oil on water. My own face looked back at me, tired, sunburned, eyes hollowed out from nights without sleep. But there was something else in that image, just behind me, near the van's reflection in the glass. A shadow. Its outline almost human but bent, as if the body had been folded wrong. I tore the photo in half, or at least I tried to. The paper didn't tear. It bent, flexing like thin metal before snapping back into shape. That's when I realized this wasn't just a film photo. The material was thicker, cold. A faint electrical hum buzzed from it, like it held a memory that refused to fade. I threw it onto the ground and stomped it under my boot. But when I looked down, it wasn't there anymore. That was the first time I genuinely thought I might be losing my mind. I packed up the van and drove west. Didn't matter where. Highway after highway, hours without stopping, until the road began to blur into a gray ribbon, dissolving into the horizon. The world outside the window looked dreamlike. Other cars vanished when I tried to focus on them, like reflections of something that wasn't really there. By the time I reached Oregon, I'd stopped checking my phone, stopped checking time. It was all one long drive through shifting light. I slept in rest stops, forest turnouts, ghostly campgrounds where no one else stayed. But no matter where I went, every morning I woke to find a Polaroid tucked under the wipers. Always the same photo. Always me, taken from just a few feet behind, no matter where I'd parked. At first, I tried throwing them away, then burning them. But each morning, there it was again. Eventually, I started talking to it. You lose something out there on the road. When you spend enough nights alone, the mind starts searching for echoes, for any sound that means you're not completely erased. I'd hold the photo in my lap and say, "What do you want from me?" And sometimes I swear I'd hear something answer back. Not a voice, more like breath shaping words against the glass. One night near Mount Rainier, I parked along a Forest Service road so narrow it looked like it was built for ghosts. I cooked soup over the small propane stove, steam fogging up the windows. Outside, the mist rolled low, thick and blue under the headlights. The air smelled like wet bark and decay. When I shut the lights off, the world outside didn't go dark. It glowed faintly, just enough for me to see shapes moving between the trees. They didn't walk. They drifted. I stayed perfectly still, breath shallow, staring through the windshield as they circled the van in complete silence. Their outlines weren't distinct, like people half remembered from a dream, but I could feel them thinking, studying. Then one of them pressed a hand against the glass. It left no mark, but the cold of that touch seeped through to my bones. And as it pulled away, I saw the same phrase appear in the condensation inside the van. One more night. The letters smeared slowly, as if the air itself wanted to erase them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there gripping the steering wheel until the mist burned off with dawn. When I finally stepped outside, the ground around the van was covered in hundreds of footprints. Barefoot. Human. All leading in circles. That's when I stopped running. I realized maybe it wasn't following me at all. Maybe I was following it. Every time I tried to leave, something small would draw me back. A sound, a smell, a glimpse of a road I couldn't remember taking. Maybe I'd been here before, just under a different sky. Maybe that man in the Polaroid hadn't vanished. Maybe he just shifted into this version of me. I started checking missing persons databases again, and that's when I found something that froze me completely. My name, Caleb Mercer, appeared twice. One record was mine, a living address listed in Arizona. The other was a cold case from 1979. Same name, same date of birth, missing from Northern California near Camp Mercy. The entry even listed his vehicle, a Volkswagen Westphalia, beige with brown trim, just like mine. I stared at the screen for hours, fingers trembling on the keyboard. No explanation, no relatives listed, just the words, presumed deceased. For a week, I couldn't eat, couldn't think. Every time I looked at my reflection, I half expected to see someone else's face staring back. Then, 3 nights ago, I got a message. No caller ID, no timestamp, just an audio file attached with the name mercerrecording.wave. When I played it, my heart nearly stopped. It was my voice, older, hoarse, breathing hard between words. "Don't go back to the cabin," it said. "It starts again there. You'll think it's over. It's not. You were supposed to leave last time. You didn't." Static swallowed the rest, but I caught one last fragment before it ended. "Burn the van." I didn't sleep that night either. I just sat there, staring at the ignition key in my hand. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't destroy the only thing that's ever carried me this far. So I drove north again. And now, I'm here back where it started. The sign for Camp Mercy is half collapsed. The letters faded into moss. The road feels different, older somehow, like it's been holding its breath all this time, waiting for me. The cabin is still there. The air around it smells like rain and iron. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what I said in that recording. But as I stand here staring at the door, something deep inside me refuses to leave, because some part of me knows the truth. No one ever disappears out here. They just come back looking for themselves. And I think I finally understand what that means. If you're hearing this, if you ever come across a Volkswagen left alone on a forest road with the keys still in the ignition, don't touch it. Don't open the door, because it's not empty. It's just waiting for you to remember which version you are.